Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Chairman, I'll hand the meeting over to yourself.
Thanks, Teresa. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's meeting of Scrutiny. We'll start off with the minutes of last meeting. I understand that there are some amendments that are to be proposed. I'm looking for indications. And I have Councillor Martin. Ian, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a couple of amendments which have been, Teresa kindly circulated in advance. If I can propose those, I believe Councillor Jeremy will second it.
Go ahead. I'll take that as a second. Thanks, Terry. Does anyone want? Everyone's seen those amendments already. Does anyone want to speak on them? Seeing none, in which case, if you could just by indication of hands show if you accept them, please. Any against? Sorry, Helen, you'll need to come off mute to speak.
Sorry, I did put my hand up. So I thought, are you asking for just to those amendments or for the whole minutes?
Sorry, just to those amendments currently.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, fine. I haven't seen anyone against. Please shout if I've done you a disservice. Otherwise, those are accepted. In which case, I will then, if there are no further comments, ask the meeting to accept the minutes in full. Or Helen again.
Sorry, I'm trying to come in at the right place there, Chairman. Yes, just a quick one. Under the non-members wishing to address the meeting, I was missed off. I was there as attending, and I did actually address the meeting. So if my name could just be added to the non-members wishing to address the meeting, please.
Yes, I'm sure we can do that, Teresa. We can make that amend, can't we? I think Helen's already raised it with you, actually.
Yes, she has. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, so subject to those two amendments, then are members happy to accept those minutes?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sorry, Ian, you're on a different screen. Is
it appropriate at this point to raise the fact that despite Teresa's best efforts, we've not had a response from Mr. Adrian Barber of Flagship to the points raised at the last meeting?
So if I can come to that moment as a matter arising from the minutes, I will give you latitude to bring it up as soon as we've finished off approving these minutes. So just going back to the minutes themselves, are there any further comments, or is everyone content with the now twice amended minutes? All those in favour? Yes, I'm seeing lots of hands up. Are there any against? I see none against. Okay, so I'm taking those minutes as accepted. Ian, you had a matter that you wanted to raise arising from those minutes.
Yes, if I could, Mr. Chairman. There was a specific item where I raised issues within the ward, and I accept at the time it should have actually been raised in advance so that they were in a position to respond. However, as you kindly directed at that meeting, that I should summarise the issue and email it to Teresa, and then it would go on to Mr. Adrian Barber, Flagship, to respond separately. There has been no response despite Teresa's best efforts. And there were a number of other things that were suggested at the time, such as an updated contacts list, and also progress towards the issuing of lists to ward members of Flagship properties within their wards. Given that most of the issues raised at the meeting with Flagship and with Mr. Barber was the unsatisfactory nature of Flagship's communications, and given that he announced that he is going to be the lead for Flagship with dealing with Breckland, it does seem a tad poor that he has failed to respond to these particular issues that were raised 5 weeks ago. Thank you.
I think the point is well made, and obviously you are aware you have been quite diligent in chasing your particular local ward issues on Flagship. Harry and Peter, I have indications from both of you. So Harry first and Peter.
If I might just add in my support to what Councillor Martin has just said. I was going to bring this up a little bit later on, but I know you'll give me your usual latitude, Chairman. In terms of Flagship and the councillor lists of the stock, which is mentioned, this was one of the many achievements of the Flagship task group, which Terry Jeremy was involved with, as well as Linda Turner. And at the time, in the preceding term, not this council, the one before, all councils had a spreadsheet, for example, for Flagship, obviously that's one of our providers, listing not just the number of properties and the type, but where they were without saying who the individuals were. So I can only add that that's something which I know that all councillors will find extremely useful when it surfaces. They did it before and managed to produce it. So we ironed out all the GDPR issues. So I just hope that can be achieved in the near future. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Harry. I've got Peter, then I've got Gordon.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Good morning. In defence of Mr. Barber, I'm trying to find it now on my emails. We had an email the other day because, as you're all aware, they had some issues with their
IT.
IT and emails, didn't they? So possibly that's the reason why we haven't had a full response to the questions, and in particular, emailing out their housing lists for certain districts.
Thank you, Peter. Those comments are noted. And Gordon, you had a point to make.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, it's not for me to defend Flagship, but as it had been raised, I just thought I'd say I did raise the matter of concern within my ward with Mr. Barber, and during the following week he did deal with that fully. I was informed, as was the parish council and individuals involved. So he didn't entirely ignore us.
Thank you, Gordon. So a tale of two stories then. I think, Tim, I'll let you come in, and then I'm going to hopefully move off this rather irregular discussion in the minutes. Carry on.
Yes, it's a slightly different matter. I wasn't able to attend the last meeting. Glad to be back. But pity I wasn't able to comment on the IT things, because I know there's been a bit more correspondence on that about the phishing emails that have come through, and it was stated that because the members who'd received them had understandably deleted them, that it wasn't possible to pursue it further. I'm a bit disappointed in that, because actually it's entirely possible to recover deleted emails so long as things like the PST files have not been compacted. And I've done it many times myself. So I think it's a little bit slapdash to sort of say that we can't take it any further, and it's just a matter of reporting things to Google.
Thank you, Tim. I think even in my broad latitude, I'm not sure comments on other items in the minutes in a meeting that you weren't present in. I think that's stretching my latitude, but I note your point. If committee members are content, I will ask if Teresa could once again email Mr. Barber with the outstanding items from the last scrutiny meeting, and perhaps just give a slight flavour as to how long it's been, if that's in the committee's happy interests. I see some nods, and then, obviously we can pick this up over the coming weeks. We won't let it rest in between. So if we don't get a response, we'll keep chasing that. But obviously, yes, communication from Flagship was a key point, and it would be good to see that improve. I'm hoping, are there any other points on the minutes? Otherwise, I'm going to finally go on to agenda item 2. No, excellent, thank you. In which case, Teresa, are you able to help us with apologies and substitutes?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we have had apologies from Councillor Turner, and Councillor Helen Crane is here as substitute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else know of any other apologies that they want to bring to my attention? Seeing none, thank you. Item 3 is Chairman's announcements. I have none. Item 4 is items of urgent business. I do have one item that has been brought to my attention by a member of this committee, which I would like to discuss given the time-sensitive nature of it. Sorry, did someone have a point there? No. So the matter is, last meeting, the committee discussed at some length some constitutional amendments which are now being proposed to council. And at the time, I think it was understood that the committee's views, which were to oppose those amendments, and indeed those amendments actually referred specifically to the powers of overview and scrutiny, would be referenced in the report that went to full council. My understanding is, and I have also checked the full council report myself, that those comments are not present. And we wanted to get some clarity around that, because obviously Scrutiny would feel strongly that its views are represented on that report. I think, Sarah, were you going to pick this up?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, there has been an error, and we're not sure what has caused the error, but the report was amended and should have gone out with the amendments in, but didn't, and it is being reissued, hopefully as we speak. So the agenda in the report will be reissued.
Thank you very much, and I will thank the eagle-eyed committee member who spotted that issue, and hopefully that will be a satisfactory resolution for it, and I look forward to the coming debate next week on the matters. Does anyone want to add anything on that? Or I think we've satisfactorily resolved it. Excellent, thank you. In which case I'll go to item 5, which is declarations of interest. Does anyone have a declaration of interest, or indeed a declaration of pecuniary interest, or any personal interest that they want to raise? Fabian?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to say that I was a recipient of one of the discretionary grants earlier in the summer.
Thank you. I don't think Sarah or Teresa, I'll come to you in a second, Ian, sorry, I've just seen you. I don't think that's a pecuniary interest, so Fabian should be able to speak on the report.
Yes, not as such for the purposes of the matter that's before OSC today.
Thank you for that clarification. Ian?
Thank you, Chairman. 2 declarations of interest. I don't believe either of them pecuniary, but for transparency purposes. Item 8 on contaminated land. My business is directly involved with contaminated land, but at no stage has it been, or is it likely to be, with contaminated land in Breckland. So that's the first one. And then item 11. As with Councillor Eagle, my business was in receipt of a COVID-19 grant. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, unless Sarah jumps in, I don't think either of those are pecuniary, so you can speak on both reports. So that is excellent. I don't see any other indications, so I suppose that there are no further interest to be declared. Item 6 is non-members wishing to address the meeting. As you know, I'm very happy for members to address the meeting at any time, but this is a special slot for you. I haven't had any indications that anyone wishes to use this slot, and I don't see any now. Please wave. Councillor Morton, let's use item 6 properly then. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I note that we have a number of electric vehicle charging points across the district. I wondered if we could have a written report back saying how well these are being used. Thank you.
Very good. That is a matter that I will ask the committee to consider in the work programme later on in this meeting. And I don't know if Councillor Sherwood might touch on that in sustainability, but I will leave it up to him whether he wishes to try and tackle the issue ahead of item, I think it's 15. Thank you. Are there any other members that wish to address, or Philip, do you want to come back on that? No, seeing none, in which case we'll move off item 6. Now, I've had a special request, and it's always my wish to fulfill them wherever possible, from Ian Sherwood, who has further commitments later on in the day, if he could speak earlier than is currently scheduled in the items list. I would like to make that request a reality. So Ian, if you're ready, I will bring forward your item, Breckland Sustainability Strategy, item 9 to now, and then you and your officers can kick off if that's all right with you.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Take it away.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank you for that. It's a wonderful world we now live in, and I have Zooms at 10, 12, 2 and 4. So and they're all likely to last over an hour each. So I really do appreciate that. I'm really pleased to be here today and to bring the sustainability subject to scrutiny, overview and scrutiny. I really do value the input we've already had so far. In a moment, I'm going to ask my Officer Greg Pearson to share some slides with you. and I will talk to the first three, and following that, Greg will follow up on the last two, and then we're very pleased to take your questions and scrutiny. So Greg, if I may, if you could share the first slide. I know you're here, Greg. Thank you. That's always that dreaded moment,
So,
isn't it?
bear with me for one second, Ian, while I try to get the screen up. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, we can, Greg.
Perfect.
Or I can.
If you just let me know when you want me to change slides in, and I'll go on to mute.
Thank you very much, Greg. So, as you will all know, we declared as a council a climate emergency. And I think this isn't just a local issue. Everything is local, but it's global, it's national, it's local, it's down to the individual in the house and what they want to do and how our local residents want to affect this. What I do know is it's incredibly important to a huge number of people, both locally and nationally. Since I was appointed lead member on the climate strategy, I get regular emails, not just from members, and I appreciate all of you have taken the time to contribute, to raise issues of concern, and to raise issues that are important to you. I also get lots of emails from groups across Breckland and further afield, and residents from across Breckland. And I know some of you have also forwarded emails to me from your own ward members. This has been tremendous to see, and on the whole, very supportive. But what it does show is there is a general concern that we do something as a council. Greg, next slide, please. So, to start with, I would like to look at what we have done so far with your support as council members. We've switched to a green energy tariff. We've also commissioned Pneumonia to carry out a carbon audit and deliver a high-level emissions management plan. We actually received this this week, and I have yet to have sight of it, but we're going to get that out to members as soon as possible. We've created a new fixed-term environment and climate change officer. Greg will probably correct me, but I won't ask him to, but I think we had over 60 applicants. I know we had over 60, I can't remember the exact number. The interviews have taken place and they've been narrowed down to the final few for the last interview. And I will be doing that next Wednesday, where I'll be meeting the final selected candidates so that we can make a final choice. The degree of experience and the volume of people wanting to take that role is incredibly encouraging. And we've had some really top-rate candidates apply for that position. This is key to what we want to do, because that new role will enable us to take forward the ideas and to make sure we make a real difference. We've developed a carbon literacy training toolkit, and that will be rolled out, and that will be for members to assess for themselves what their impact is and to also look at how they can make a difference. There are various online versions of this, and when I went to the Local Government Association conference and training on the climate, I was surprised to see what parts of your life do make a big difference to your carbon footprint, things you wouldn't normally necessarily think about. And if we're going to look at it as a council, we have to break it down for individuals. So if once we know what the council's impact is, it will be interesting for us all as members and residents to understand what our impact is and how changes can really affect how you can reduce your carbon footprint. We also had a small budget allocated to us for research and evidence gathering. And I do understand the frustrations of many of you that it's taken us over a year to get to the point we are. But we've now got a date in the diary in January when we will be adopting our climate and sustainability policy. COVID had a drastic effect on the work programme, and rightfully so,
many of the officers were reallocated to serving residents on the front line during that pandemic, which is still ongoing. But when we came back after the initial lockdown in June, we really focused on that, and we've moved things forward. So I'm pleased that where we are. We also had a UEA internship student with us, and that was really useful because he was able to do lots of research for us. And we really have spoken to many, many organisations and had input from all kinds of sources, and make sure that we've read up to understand exactly where local government needs to be and the ideas that we need to be looking at so we can have a proper impact. We're a member of the Norfolk Climate Change Partnership. Now, this is an officer-led group from all the councils across Norfolk, and I was very keen to see that we also had member-led input into this across the county. So I asked for this to be raised, and I asked our leader to do this for us, and I'm pleased to say that we will now have also a board made up of councillors, members with responsibility for climate strategy from across Norfolk. In some ways, climate change is like the pandemic when you look at borders. It's important what you do in your house, it's important what you do in your community, but it's also much bigger. So Breckland can't act on its own. We have to have cooperation from across Norfolk, and we have to have cooperation across the UK and be part of bigger schemes and across the world so that this has a real impact. We've also ensured that we're part of the county-wide application to the Green Homes Grant Scheme. So those are the actions we've done so far. Next slide, please. So those of you who were able to join us for the Members Forum a few weeks ago, you will have been made aware of this. But we have looked, and with your help and evidence gathering, we're looking at 3 pillars for the strategy here. And those 3 pillars are: we will reduce our own impact as an organisation on the environment. I think it's important to lead, and I think our residents expect us to do this. So we're going to show that we're going to look, and with the carbon audit report, we'll have the information. I felt it was incredibly important. I was pushed by some members, and I respect that, to start taking actions sooner than later. But I believe we need a clear starting point so we can actually understand where we are, so that we can focus on things that will make a real difference. Number 2, we will use our regulatory powers to influence behavioural change. Obviously, planning, waste and recycling, environment protection. That's the second pillar. So where we can, we will make sure that we can encourage, and if needs be, enforce actions to make things happen in a better way for the environment. Number 3, again, with all the information and contact I've had from residents, I know there's an appetite out there ready for this. So we're going to enable our communities to take action for themselves. So there are 3 pillars: looking at ourselves, looking at our organisation, using our regulatory powers to help influence behavioural change, and enabling our communities to take action for themselves. Finally, as part of the strategy, as a council, we will need to declare a date by which the council will be carbon neutral. This is an important thing. Many organisations have done this, and we need to show our local residents we've got a commitment to doing that. Again, the carbon audit report will give us an idea of how far we've got to go and what we need to do to achieve that. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'm now going to hand over to Greg Pearson. Before I ask Greg to speak, I would, if I may, Mr. Chairman, like to thank Greg enormously. Greg is incredibly busy. He's been a real asset to me, and without him, I would not have been able to gather the information that I have so far. Thank you, Greg, for what you've done so far. And if I can hand over to you now to deal with the work programme ideas so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sherwood, and it's been a pleasure. So Councillor Sherwood set out what our guiding principles for what we want to do, but I guess in reality, members of the commission, members of the public, partners want to know in reality what that could look like. So when we bring the policy forward in January, as Councillor Sherwood alluded to, we will be bringing forward a draft initial work programme. Now, I want to be clear that this is very much a starter for 10. We recognise that this will be an ongoing journey, and we would like to keep dialogue open about what that work programme could look like over time, and we fully expect it to shift and flex as we go through. So what we're presenting here is ideas so far. What I've tried to do is set them out under each of the 3 pillars that Councillor Sherwood has just gone through. However, just to note that a number of these could sit across multiple pillars. So if I just run through them very quickly, and then happy to take questions at the end, as Councillor Sherwood said. So in terms of looking at reducing our own impact, well, we obviously need to set a date to be carbon neutral by. Obviously, the government has set a target for us all to be carbon neutral by 2050. There are many schools of thought that that is too late. So we have asked the organisation that we're working with to conduct our carbon audit to give us some sensible views on what is an achievable date and what we'd need to do to get there, and to give us multiple dates. So do we want a really aggressive time frame and loads of actions, or a slightly slower time frame? So we'll be looking at that in the not too distant future. You'll see some green ticks on some of these. These are where we have either completed these actions or are in train with them. So we have a carbon audit. We have a draft report, as Councillor Sherwood has indicated. We're hoping to finalise that in the next week, and then we'll be in a position, certainly by the end of the month, to share that more widely. We are concluding our recruitment, as Councillor Sherwood mentioned, next week. Key actions in this also, we need to look at the carbon footprint of our organisation and deliver a carbon reduction plan. Now, the main element of that will be around how do we reduce the impact our buildings have. So we do have a number of key assets, operational assets such as Elizabeth House, Breckland House, leisure centres, although they are run by another provider. And then we have our assets portfolio. So we need to look about how we make those buildings carbon neutral and explore opportunities such as the public sector decarbonisation fund that the government has set up as part of its COVID recovery. Again, another fundamental to this is looking at our travel and making member and staff travel much more sustainable. So at the minute, a number of, well, in the pre-COVID world, we were all travelling to Elizabeth House and various places across the district to carry out our functions. We now need to look at how we do that in a kind of more sustainable way going forward. In terms of carbon literacy training, we have developed a product. We are going to be coming to a small group of volunteers in the not too distant future just to sense check that and make any fine tuning we need to, and then roll that out much wider across members and also the officer cohort. We are exploring options around salary sacrifice schemes. So the council already runs a cycle to work scheme, but we want to broaden that out, look at our car loan scheme, for example, and can that be used as a mechanism for encouraging staff to purchase more sustainable options, but also to look at what the kind of envelope around salary sacrifices. So could we make donations and so forth? And obviously, as I've alluded in a couple of examples already, we will look to draw down funding from various government grant schemes that have been announced or have been in the ether for some time. So that would include the Public Sector Decarbonisation Fund that I just mentioned, the Green Homes Grant, which Councillor Sherwood previously mentioned. There is a plethora of funds available for electric vehicle charging points and so forth. So we'll be really looking to kind of maximise what we can bring in to help us on our journey. In terms of using our kind of powers to influence behavioural change, this is a bit of a mix of how we use our powers and some of the projects we could be seen to be leading. So I want to kind of jumping around the slide slightly. I think feedback from the member session that we held at the beginning of November, which was very positive and very helpful, was the local plan is going to be key to shaping this in the future, and absolutely that is correct. We need to look at the policies that we set as part of the local plan to help drive this agenda forward, and that would cover things such as housing design principles, water management, sustainable transport schemes, etc. So we will be looking at that in great detail as an officer cohort. In terms of other things we might look to do, well, actually our procurement strategy is fundamental to this as well. So we are a very large part of the local economy, and we can use our purchasing power to influence more positive and sustainable behaviours. We can certainly look at, in terms of our procurement scoring, how we can incentivise companies that are more sustainable. Other schemes that we want to explore is looking at tree planting schemes, again, acknowledging feedback that they need to be the right trees in the right place. Also exploring trees aren't always the most effective carbon sink, so actually let's identify what is and try and work with those as well. We want to explore whether or not we can promote greater usage of electric vehicles, particularly with the announcement that there will be no new diesel or petrol vehicles from 2030. But actually, we have a very small, limited number of charging points at this moment. So we want to explore how we increase those across the district. We want to explore cycling schemes as well. So recognising we are a rural district, we want to look at how we promote safer cycling across the district, but kind of focusing in our towns. Could we explore the option of some kind of cycling scheme like the Beryl Bike scheme that Norwich City has, to kind of promote kind of more sustainable travel within the town itself? We also need to look at in greater detail at renewable energy options. Particularly, we have switched to a green tariff. That is the beginning step, and we need to look at how we kind of really kind of bring that forward, and also how we kind of promote that more to our residents. And then in terms of enabling our communities, well, a really quick and easy win is we need a kind of really high quality sustainability web page up on the council that would act as a directory to signpost people to key information. As I just touched on, we'd like to promote kind of switch and save activities around renewable energy. While we ourselves are not looking to use carbon offsetting unless we absolutely have to, and only for a short period of time, we might want to explore setting up carbon offsetting funds and mechanisms for our residents. We want to promote insulation schemes for green warmth. This will also help with a number of our residents that are suffering from fuel poverty in the district as well. And then also we want to create a modest pot of grant funding that community groups and so forth can apply to do some local grassroots projects. That's it in terms of the presentation today, but myself and Councillor Sherwood are more than happy to take any questions that you all might have.
Thank you, Greg. And before I hand back to you, Mr. Chairman, Councillor Rodri Oliver, I'd like to say that those ideas in the work programme, many of those have come from members and through the feedback forum. So thank you for that. Thank you, Councillor Oliver. Greg and I are really pleased to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Greg. I've got Tim and I've got Mike and I've got Fabian and I've got Philip. And I'm just looking on the other screen and I can't see anyone else indicating at this time. So Tim, if you start us off, then we'll go to Mike, Fabian and Philip.
Okay. Just a slight worry on the carbon offsetting side. I mean, the message that came back from the members forum was really very, very strongly that we're not going down that route. So it's disappointing to see that now appearing as an option, even if we're helping other people to do it. It's not the way forward, is to buy your way out of these obligations. Coming back to the agenda rather than the slides, and this is a point that I made at the forum before, and I'm going to repeat it because we do seem to be making a very big song and dance about our change of our electricity tariff. It's very clear that what we've done, we're tied into that supplier. Fine, I understand the issue, but we have not saved any carbon in a net value across the country. All that's happened is that the supplier is producing electricity in exactly the same way as they always have done. They have divided it into carbon producing electricity and carbon free electricity, and we've just been allocated the carbon free electricity. It's not the way forward, and it can be seen as greenwashing. We really need to be doing these things properly, and I appreciate the difficulty at the moment, but let's not try and big this one up that we've actually made any benefit in terms of reducing carbon overall. It's just an accounting function is what we've done. I was going to ask about what had happened to the carbon literacy training package. I think you've already covered that, but you said you were going to test it out beforehand. So can I put my hand in the air for that, please? Because I'm slightly concerned that we're actually some of the things that we're doing are not necessarily as correctly carbon free as we're saying, as I'd already mentioned before. Do you want me to stop there, or do you want me to go actually on to the last bit, which is the
Could I stop you there, Tim, only to give other members a chance, and then we can come back if your questions aren't answered by the time we get round everyone else. Okay. Ian, do you want a chance to come back on Tim? I think it was 3 main points he made.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My memory is not what it used to be. I was concerned then, I did make some notes, but I was concerned you were going to get everybody to ask the questions and I'd got to try and remember them all for the end. But I'll try and cover off the 2. We fully acknowledge, Councillor Burt, your points about the green electric switch. You will have heard Greg say during his comments that we need to make bigger steps on that. So we acknowledge what you've said, but I always like to look on the positive rather than the negative. We've made a first step. I think our carbon audit will identify that that's a first step, but we acknowledge that there is more to be done on that. The carbon offset, while I accept we as the members, there was a strong feel that that's not the way forward. And also for myself, I always see carbon offset as an easy way round trying to solve a problem, but not a real answer. But we have to acknowledge that there are some individuals and some residents across Breckland who cannot necessarily make the changes they would like to make because of various parts of the way they have to live their life. For example, my house is currently heated by oil. I'm looking at changing that option, but at the moment that's not feasible. So I have to buy fossil fuel to heat my home. I've chosen to use a carbon offset on that, so I pay a premium for my oil so that the company pays over money to schemes to help. So there still may be a place for carbon offset. The thing I think about Greg's list was there were many ideas and many comments through the members panel, so we're trying to pick them all up. When we eventually come to the policy for full council, then we'll be able to finalise and agree exactly what we do. I acknowledge also your wish to be part of the trial for the toolkit, so we'll acknowledge that, and I think those were the 3 questions. Rodri, I appreciate there may be lots of questions. If you want to ask more than one person from this point, I'll do my very best to write everything down and answer in bigger groups if you'd like to. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. That's right. We'll go one at a time, only because sometimes they have the same question, and so we save ourselves a little bit of time in the long run. Tim, do you have anything to come back on immediately there? And if so, be brief, please.
No, I won't come back on that, but can I come back on the sustainability policy documents on pages 74, 75 later?
Yes. Mike, you're up next.
Basic, straightforward question. In terms of the grants funding or grant being available and what have you to the various community groups, could we specifically target areas like village halls, etc., most of which are using fossil fuels for heating in some shape or form, or high electricity? Their actual running costs could be offset with PVA, well, photovoltaic cells, etc. So is there going to be a specific target to local public buildings as such, or community buildings?
We haven't fixed that yet, Councillor Nairn, but what we will make sure is that the website, when we have it up and running, will be able to lead organisations, voluntary organisations, to other options. So if there are grants nationally that can be used, we'll make sure that they're directed to those. And obviously councillors will have input on the final policy. So Greg is making notes of what you're all contributing today, and obviously it will be in the minutes for OV and scrutiny. So thank you for those ideas and comments.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Ian. I've got Fabian, then Philip, then Ian, Martin, and then Terry. So Fabian.
Thank you, Rodri. Yes, Ian, just an observational point. As you've said, it is behavioural change, and us as councillors have to be leaders in our community. Perhaps if we could, a few councillors selected, and perhaps I'd like to nominate yourself, obviously, as lead member for climate change. We actually had an audit on our own point. So when we go out and speak to people, we can actually say, look, I know that I failed on this point, and some of us might think we're very green or very inefficient green, but we find, the roles are reversed, and perhaps a selection through some volunteer councillors. So we give the mix, some with young families, some, modern houses, old houses. So we can actually give out, then we can give a personal point to people and encourage that behavioural change. And just a quick second thing, Hebden Bridge obviously up north, they've got electric trade bikes inside their market town to do localised delivery. So I think they've gone in with a community group and they've supplied the electric trade bikes. So the market town centre shops, they can then take orders and then they go and do a delivery within the town centre. Obviously stops vehicles, encourages, and I thought perhaps you'd like to try and see if you can pinch some money from the MTI or from Mark's bit to put that through to your climate change. But that's just observations, really. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ian, if you've got any comments on those.
I think Councillor Eagle there said they were for observations. They were for some very good observations. Fabian is one of my most regular contributors, and I genuinely appreciate that. He's always got ideas for me, and he's always copying me in on information he's read. So thank you, Fabian.
Thank you both. Philip, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I'm very pleased to support a lot of the ideas coming forward through this. I guess the only thing is I'm slightly impatient for it to happen quicker. And I would like to emphasise that really climate change is about reducing carbon, and we can set a target of 0 carbon for 2050 or 2045, but I think we need to have a programme where we can see it's a realistic one coming forward in 3 or 5 years, so we can start to chart progress.
Thanks. Ian?
Thank you, Councillor Moore. And again, Philip is an incredible contributor to my inbox. And again, I genuinely appreciate that. Philip and I have spoken offline as well, and I understand his concerns. You're right, Philip, and I think it will be important to make sure we have got some measures so that as a council we can see we're achieving what we've set out to achieve. And I would also like to think we can also keep some kind of check and commitment on the community in the wider Breckland, so that we can see that the whole district is playing its part. So again, thank you for those comments.
Thank you both. Ian Martin.
Thank you, Chairman. It's more on observation. First off, it's a tremendous piece of work, and it's certainly something that we can work on and support. So congratulations both to Ian and to the team putting it together. The one observation I wanted to add was to beware in terms of the local plan. Yes, planning in this will be important. Design issues, whether it's the existing system or the one proposed in the green paper, sorry, the white paper, play an important role. The issue, or the big issue always with this, is viability and not overloading requirements to such an extent that developers disappear, go away, or they then appeal them, and those very well-meaning requirements are then lost. So there is a issue of being practical and recognizing quite what we can achieve, rather than listing everything, which is rather wonderful, but may not be hugely helpful within the planning process. But more than willing to work with that and make the most of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. I'm going to bow to your knowledge, because I know how hard you worked on finding out information about the planning white paper and all that's going around and going forward as well with what we can and can't do. So I'm sure that members will contribute incredibly to make sure we get that balance right. I think there's got to be benefits as well, and we want to make sure that when we put things in, they're not window dressing. But there are schemes, and again, through what I've been involved with nationally, there are some really good ideas out there, and I'll be relying upon people like yourself really to make sure we get that balance exactly right. And can I thank you for your comments at the beginning of your question? Thank you.
Thank you both. And Terry.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ian and Greg, for the report and the presentation. There's just a couple of points I wanted to make. Firstly, around trees. It's probably not a well-known fact, but about a third of my ward is actually, the streets are named after trees. Over the years, a significant number of them have disappeared as they've sort of either outgrown their location or become diseased or damaged or anything. Just recently, actually, a significant number were felled by Breckland for that reason. I'm all in favour of planting new trees, but if we had a policy whereby if any Breckland-owned trees on our land were removed, there was an automatic replacement, I think that would be a very good policy to adopt. It's something we've pushed for at county level. And the only other comment I was going to make was around salary sacrifice. It's not a term I particularly like, I must admit. If we could come up with something better, that would be great. I saw mention of officers. Perhaps it can be looked into whether it could equally be available for members as well as officers, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeremy. Terry, you're absolutely right. One of the best conversations I've had has been with the Woodland Trust. We spoke to them very early, and a phrase they used, and one that I'm really taken with, and I think it's incredibly important, because nationally, every organisation and individuals are talking about we must plant trees. In fact, I'm not sure, it's either this week or last week, it was either National Plant a Tree Day or National Plant a Tree Week. And the Woodland Trust are very keen on that. But there's much more to that, in so much as the canopy cover is one thing that the Woodland Trust talked to us about. And what that's about is gauging how well your district or area is covered with trees and making sure that canopy cover maintains or increases. That's a much better measure than how many trees you've got. Because to be honest, a tree planted today won't be its most effective for many, many years. So if you monitor the canopy cover, and of course we're very lucky in Breckland to have one of the largest lowland forests in the country, if not the largest lowland forest in the country, with Thetford Forest and the bits that come into our district. So, and it's about putting the right trees in the right place. I know that's a little catchphrase, but just planting a tree isn't the answer. It has to be maintained initially. And one of the schemes I've seen work with other organisations is where you get like a tree volunteer, or someone in the community who'll say, yeah, we'll plant that tree. It could be a parish council or a team of people, but we'll look after them for the next 5 years. Because if you have drought conditions, they'll need watering. There's no good sticking a tree in and think it's the answer. But yeah, I really take on board what you've said, and thank you again for your comments.
Thank you both. Terry, anything you wanted to add?
No, thank you. As long as those points are noted, I'm grateful.
That's great, thank you. I'll indulge myself with one question as well, which is only, obviously this report is excellent and thank you very much for it. I just wanted to check in relation to climate change generally, clearly carbon emissions are not the only emission that matter regarding greenhouse gases. Are we looking to add anything in the future around the other contributors to the greenhouse effect?
You're absolutely right, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Rodri, for valid points there. I've learned an incredible lot over the last 12 months. I was extremely lucky when the leader appointed me as lead member for climate strategy, because it's something personally I have a passion for. But I'm not an expert. I've probably picked up a lot over the last 12 months. And there are some really knowledgeable people amongst our members and our officer cohort, and particularly when we appoint our officer to help us with this project, some of these people will come with tremendous knowledge. And they're going to be able to help us and direct us and give us ideas where we need to be. Carbon is not the only measure, you're absolutely right. But I will be relying upon other organisations and our officer team and our experts to make sure we pick up all the points that we need to going forward. I think many of us, members and residents alike, have picked up so much and learnt so much, and we do understand that there are other measures. And you're right, I haven't got an answer to that, but it's a valid point, and I'll make sure that our future officer hears those messages and looks at all those points. So thank you.
Thank you, Ian. I haven't seen any other members indicate, so I will return to Tim if no one else has. I've got Robert, sorry. And I can't see anyone else at the moment. So we'll go Robert, then I'll come back to Tim, and then I think we can wrap this item up. So Robert, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. At the workshop, I did a sort of back of the envelope calculation, and as Ian said, tree canopy cover has to go 30 to 50 years to be fully effective. But once you've got fully planted woodland, we're talking 300 to 400 tons of carbon dioxide to capture at 50 years. And if you number crunch that at 5 tons per capita across the district,
you need to allocate 6.5 square miles of forest, or 2 acres per parish per year. It's just, I find it useful to have headline figures to feed into thinking.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Again, I want to thank Robert, if I may, Rodri, you are being quite lenient. I don't know how much time you normally allow people. I feel I've taken a lot of your time. But Robert, again, contributes enormously and sends me lots of information, and I really appreciate his knowledge. So thank you, Robert.
I will allow you as much time as you require, Ian, bearing in mind you have to escape at some point. Tim, your final points.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to reiterate, thanks Ian, for just planting a tree isn't the answer. You're right. And at the forum, I did mention that we have to have ways of capturing that carbon. And I think that might be slightly missing from the discussion in the slides today, like using the timber that those trees produce. But come back to the agenda, and on page 74 and 75, we've got this the draft document, the Breckland Sustainability Policy. I was disappointed when I read it on the agenda because it's very soft, and the slides were much more punchy. And I think we should be using the wording that you had in your slides. For example, and that first bullet point, we want to set a positive example. No, we will set a positive example. That's what you said in the slides. Let's actually do that. And later on it goes, we will look to reduce our organisational. No, we're not going to look to reduce our carbon footprint. We're actually going to do it. I mean, what's the point of having a policy if we're just going to look at it? So can we please review this sustainability policy and actually make it punchy, and actually that we are going to do something and not just fluffy things around the edges? I think that's probably, I mean, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Tim. Ian?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Burt. I feel your frustration at the delay and the choice of language. Your comments are well made and noted. I'm very, very keen that when the policy arrives with you all for that meeting in January, the words will be punchy, they will be right, and we will have real targets, and we will have real achievable goals. But I guess if there's anything any of you will know, who know me, have known me for a while, I'm cautious. I'm cautious, and I don't like to overcommit, but I respect what you say. So I don't like to set unachievable or false hope, but you're absolutely made a good comment that, yeah, we will make sure that we have a good course of direction and achievable goals and good language. So, Councillor Oliver, Rodri, thank you very, very much. I think you're drawing it to a close here. I've really valued this opportunity to explain much of the sustainability programme. It's an important part of the progress of this, and I'm very much looking forward to January. And if there's anything further, I'm happy, but thank you for bringing me forward. And once the item has concluded, if I may be excused, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
You are, of course, excused once the item is concluded, and I can't see any further indications from members. So I thank you and your team for the report, and hopefully you will take on board some of the comments made by councillors today. So thank you very much, Ian. Have a good one. Good luck with the rest of your meetings. See you later. So moving on then, we will go back into the normal running order of things, which I think is now item 7, which is Banham Poultry. So this was an item that I asked to be put on the agenda, so I should declare my personal interest. Being a councillor for Attleborough, clearly this is extremely close to the hearts of many of my residents, and one of the key reasons I wanted Scrutiny to look at it. I did not craft it as a councillor call for action because at this stage I didn't feel that we had the information available to us to make it a call for action. Sadly and happily, I suppose, insofar as there is progress happening in this area, but that progress has precluded us from having either Banham Poultry or the Environment Agency actually attend in person. you as members will have seen the response provided by Bannon Poultry in relation to the 2 questions on the agenda. We have also received a statement which I will read for public consumption from the Environment Agency. And then I will invite any members to speak ahead of statements from me, particularly, of course, any Attleborough members who wish to say anything. Bear with me as I just locate the statement on the technology that is. So here we are. So in relation to the first question being the company's issues with odour emissions and its steps taken in addressing these, in particular those required by the Environment Agency, both which have or have not been implemented to date, the Environment Agency has stated as follows. Where we are able, we are willing to discuss our regulatory decisions and actions. As the Council will be aware, there is an active criminal investigation taking place regarding activities at the site at Station Road. Therefore, the information we were able to provide at this time is limited to ensure the ongoing investigation is not prejudiced. Over the last 2 years, we have increased our regulatory input into the site. As the Council will be aware, the Environment Agency regulates matters that take place within the boundaries of the site, given that the operator conducts their activities under the remit of environmental permit issued under the Environmental Permitting Regulations 2016. The environmental permit for the site has a number of conditions to control and manage the impact of the operations to the environment and human receptors. Matters which take place outside of the boundaries of the site are not regulated by the agency. To clarify, these include, but are not limited to, health and safety regulation, which includes COVID-19 and food safety, the spillage of offal outside of the site boundary, which falls into the remit of Norfolk County Council trading standards, and planning matters, including site current planning permission, Buns Bank planning permission, operating hours, etc., which fall into the remit of the Council Planning Department here at Breckland. The agency are aware that there have been concerns raised regarding the odour from the site. We will continue to work with the operator and the community in order to investigate and address these concerns. As an agency, we make every effort to regulate compliance with environmental permits. We have an action plan with the operator which covers a wide range of actions, but generally the actions relate to asking Bannon Poultry Limited 2018, or sorry, BPL 2018 Limited, to address issues which have the potential to cause off-site odour. While we continue to investigate the site, we have issued enforcement notices to the operator, most recently in October 2020, and warning letters for some minor infractions of their permit. As stated at the outset, a criminal investigation is currently underway regarding the odour pollution in 2019-20. The progress of this has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, but is continuing. Then in relation to the second question, the company's regulatory requirements, breaches of which it is aware and steps it has taken to remedy those, the Environment Agency states, the company's regulatory requirements are set out in the environmental permit issued under the Environmental Permitting Regulations 2016. Whilst we are conducting a criminal investigation, we are also liaising with the operator to address issues identified as detailed above. As the regulator, we act in a fair and proportionate manner that works to protect people and the environment, as well as supporting businesses and sustainable economic growth. Underlying our commitment to firm but fair regulation is the principle of proportionality in securing compliance and targeting of enforcement action. You can read about the Environment Agency's position on the enforcement sanctions and offence response options on our website. And then they've provided the link to the website. So that obviously is a little bit quicker than having the Environment Agency here. And I hope when this investigation is concluded, we will be able to bring in the operator and the Environment Agency to discuss further impacts on the community. At this stage, I will take any questions that members have. I would ask, although this is obviously a local issue in Attleborough, this is clearly has a cross-cutting impact in terms of the operation of sites under Environmental Agency auspices. So if members have any broader points they want to raise at this stage, then those would obviously be entertained as well. Are there any members wishing to speak on the statement I've read out, or indeed the statement that was previously circulated by the operator? I am not seeing Vera.
Living very close to the factory, I don't get the odour as much as people that live further away because of the wind. I do think Fun and Poultry are trying in some areas, and as a resident as well as a councillor, I do think the odour has improved. But having said that, if you happen to catch it, it is quite sickening. So something needs to be done. The I keep calling it Bun and Poultry, but it isn't, need to actually continue trying to do the improvements they're doing. But if you come down to basics, the factory is in the wrong place. You know, it's right near a housing estate, and there are going to be more houses built very close. So the matter is only going to get worse. So it is something that we need to be on top of, and any improvements that are made need to be quick as possible, or done as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Vera. The only question I have, and this is one for officers in our environmental health team, is there is a common law nuisance legislation, or not legislation, but case law, which empowers the council to take action against any individual operation that causes nuisance under the common law meaning to residents within their district. Clearly, the main regulator of this site is the Environment Agency, but I wanted to establish whether or not Breckland has considered nuisance as per common law, and whether or not it may be applicable in respect of the difficulties being faced by residents. Because once again, we find ourselves in the slightly uncomfortable position where we represent our residents, but don't have any direct ability to get the changes that they so desperately need. I don't know which officer would like to attempt to answer that question. Yes, Sarah, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the question. So it is something that is available to us. Having said that, obviously the Environment Agency have an active investigation going ahead, so we wouldn't want to interfere with that, and it would make best sense for that investigation to conclude and run its natural course before we looked at this as an option. We haven't looked at it to date as an option, but as I say, it's something we could look to, and we'd have to take legal advice. But I would reiterate that it wouldn't be something that I would recommend whilst this Environment Agency investigation is taking place. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That's helpful. Marin, you've made a comment in the chat. Do you want to speak at all? Yes.
Well, actually, I was putting a chat and it pinged off, and I didn't finish it. Thank you, Chairman. It was just to advise the councillors that the odours from Ban and Poultry, I know date back to when I started as a councillor in 2003, and I think that they were a lot worse in Attleborough than they are at the moment. However, it was an Environment Agency responsibility, and all we could do was put pressure on them. And I think Sarah is the expert. I think that that's probably still the case, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. So I don't want to say anything else at this stage that might prejudice any investigations, and clearly we only have the facts provided to us by those statements. The only last question I would ask is Sarah if she knows whether there is a timeline on the conclusion of this criminal investigation.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not aware, but it's something we can obviously find out and report back.
I think that would be very helpful, certainly for the people of Attleborough. Thank you, members, for once again indulging a more local issue than is sometimes our remit in scrutiny. So I thank members for their contributions insofar as they occurred. And we will move off item 7 and go to item 8, which is the review of the contaminated land strategy. And I think Richard is going to be presenting that.
Chairman, if I may, that will be Andrew Grimley will be presenting that. Unfortunately, Richard couldn't be here today. Thank you, Andrew.
Apologies, Andrew. Please do take it away.
If I can jump in first, Chairman.
Well, and indeed, apologies again. Gordon, please jump in first. Then Andrew, take it away. And Richard, I'm sorry you're not here.
Thank you. Yeah, Richard couldn't make it, as has already been said. Andrew is here filling in, and we still do have somebody who knows about this in Breckland. I will point out to members of the Commission that this is a review of the contaminated land policy. We've had the policy for some time, it's not new. And also just point out to members that it is a strategic policy and not a specific one. It is part of our duties as a council to produce this regularly. And of course, in the light of the sustainability discussion we've recently had, it does deal a great deal with protecting the environment and also protecting the health of our residents. So I do present to you the policy which you have in your minutes and the proposal which you have before you, which I will hopefully be able to propose to you in just a few minutes. If anybody has any questions, I may be able to answer them, but that's quite unlikely. And I'm sure Andrew will be able to answer them.
Thank you, Gordon. Andrew, do you have any comments you want to make before we go to any questions from members?
Not any specific ones, thank you. Primarily, it's really sort of it's looking at is an existing a strategy that has been in place for a number of years. It was last fully updated in 2015. We have updated it very slightly to make it sort of slightly more user-friendly with sort of slightly better English and a layout. But in practice, it is an existing document that looks at the council's strategic approach towards dealing with contaminated land across the district, and it's the approach that we would take for looking at dealing with contaminated land sort of when we receive complaints. The main issue that we have is that we deal with brownfield sites that are contaminated via the planning regime, and because we see that is the most sort of practical and appropriate way of actually dealing with it, because that means that sort of the council is not involved in the finance of that side. It really falls to the developers to provide that sort of support to that. But I'm happy to receive any questions or specific issues if you wish.
Thank you. Before I come to you, Tim, I just want to say, could we avoid talking about specific items of contaminated land in wards and direct our questions solely to the strategic nature of this report? Tim, I've seen your indications. If you kick us off, and then if anyone else wants to indicate, please, I will keep. And I've got Mark as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Andy.
Thank you. Yes, I noticed that we have an option to either not do it or follow it, but the recommendation is we do. So since it's an obligation, I suggest we should do something. I've looked on the website under the environmental contaminated land section, and I thought that we had an obligation to maintain a public register, but I can't find it. All there is a big highlighted section where you can pay £64 and do a search of an area. Can I have some clarity, please? Do we maintain a public register so that everybody knows the magnitude or not of any issues? I mean, that's what I was looking for, to see what sort of scale of problems we had in Breckland. And at the moment, I've no idea. Another comment, please, on page 56, the flow chart. I seriously think that we need to have a relook at that, because that doesn't follow the normal flow chart formulas and layout. We've got one box going into multiple boxes, and we've got two exits from single boxes. That's not how flow charts work, I'm afraid. So please, can we have a review of that one?
Thank you. Gordon or Andrew, would you like to deal A, with our statutory duty to maintain a public register, and B, cover off what you can purchase, which Tim was mentioning, the £64, and then C, if you have any comments on the somewhat irregular flowchart description on page 56.
I will pass that over to Andrew, or possibly even Sarah, who also I see is still on the line.
Okay, good. Andrew, go ahead.
Yes, certainly we do have a statutory duty to maintain a register. The feature really is that we need to be very careful is that if we actually publish sites that have not got confirmation that they are fully contaminated, we potentially sort of blight those pieces of land. So ultimately, the register that we actually provide is for those sites that have been designated as fully contaminated and have got issues in relation to the process that's highlighted in the strategy. So it's a source, a pathway, and then a receptor that's actually affected by it. Over the years, we've sort of dealt with 2 or 3 sites, and those are put on the site, but those are relatively aged details. We have another list of other sites that are potentially contaminated. However, that relates to fairly aged sort of information that we have in terms of potential sort of sites that might have contamination, whether it be running from sort of brownfield sites or whether it be old landfill sites. Ultimately, to be able to actually put them onto the register and actually confirm them on the website, we need to actually have fully worked up information to actually say, yes, these are contaminated and are then seen as being affecting residents and having a pathway to them. And in some respects, there is a subtle difference between actually registering those ones and actually sort of placing those on. That said, that we do use that information as part of our planning responses to actually identify that where there has been a past use on that site, that developers and anyone else, landowners who have an interest in that site, do actually clean up their sites and make it safe for any potential future uses. That's okay.
So just on that one, Andrew, can I just clarify then? So the public register that needs to be published by statute, that is the one where you have confirmed the 3 aspects that make it a contaminated site. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, and is that currently available on our website?
That is currently available on the website. In some respects, it has got sort of information in relation to a couple of sites, but those have been cleaned up or sort of attended to. There was one in Swaffham, one in Shipton, but those have been dealt with and addressed.
Forgive me. So is the register not currently completely up to date?
No, it is up to date in terms of those sites that actually have been identified and remediated. That it is basically sort of they are designated as contaminated land sites. The register that we have, or the list of other potentially contaminated land sites, are ones that we have accumulated information on, but primarily have not identified that there is that pathway or link to someone being affected by it.
Okay, fine. So that's great, thank you. And then Tim's second point, I think, was around what you could purchase off the website.
Yes, we offer a service where if somebody says, I would like to actually find out information, it's similar to the land search process, that if somebody says, I want to find out more information about the previous use of certain sites and what the council actually has available to it, we can actually provide that on a localized basis. The feature really is that sort of, as I said before, if we actually start publicizing a lot of information that potentially blights a site, it can cause more damage than it actually solves. However, if individuals who have an interest in that site, whether they're looking to buy it or develop it or live near to it, wish to find out that information, then we can provide that to them. A large proportion of those questions that we receive are coming from consultants or from developers, and ultimately a number of those investigations into the council's records do take time, and as such we make a reasonable charge to reflect the council's input and involvement in those cases.
Thank you, Andrew. And then the last question was around the flowchart on page 56.
Absolutely, I'll take that point, and we will look at that again, sort of, and make sure that that's addressed, and we'll feed that back through the consultation process and update that and make that better to use.
Thank you, Andrew. Tim, is there anything you want to come back on immediately from those responses?
Just a bit concerned that you can buy the information, but the public register seems to be very, very restricted. Something doesn't feel quite right here. And all I was trying to do was understand the magnitude of the issue across Breckland, and that doesn't seem to be publicly available.
Thank you, Tim. I think your comment is noted. Mark.
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
I did read all 29 pages of the new policy, and I think you've achieved what you set out to do, and it's made it much more user friendly to read. Even I understood it, which is an achievement in itself. There is one major comment I make about it, in that most of the work you do on contaminated land is as a result of a planning application, and throughout the document you're saying its current use. The land's current use the land must be used safe for its current use. If it's for a planning application, surely it's current proposed use rather than the current use, because the current use could be a disused quarry. Well, it's fine as a disused quarry, but if you try and build houses on it, then it's current proposed use rather than current use. That's one comment. And just to prove I have read it, in paragraph 5.1.1, the second paragraph, the second sentence, there's a word missing between many sites and the district. I think it should be in or within the district. But that's the first one's most important. I think probably I'd like a comment back on that, please, Chairman.
Thank you, Mark. Gordon, I will go to Andrew unless you jump up and down. Okay, Andrew.
Well, that was that.
Yes, in some respects, it's sort of there is that sort of feature where sort of we are looking at the safety of current sites in terms of their safety for use. Obviously, as it progresses from in the example they use sort of in terms of being a quarry or a brownfield site, that will have one use in terms of sort of existing. Obviously, from a point of view of it being proposed to being a housing estate or something along those lines, then they'll move on. And from a point of view of obviously sort of us requiring remediation or investigation into a site, obviously that is changing from one existing use to another. And obviously, so we'll look at that wording again. In some respects, sort of current and future, particularly around the planning side, sort of does actually sort of merge into one another. But we'll have a look at that wording again and see whether we can make it slightly clearer if that's appropriate.
Thank you, Andrew. Ian, I think Martin, did you not indicate earlier?
I did, Chairman, but I was having difficulty finding the mute button to unmute. I do apologise. First off, certainly everything I've seen on this, and based on experience, the strategy seems to be very straightforward. It fulfills its statutory requirements. I do note, and as has been commented, that the main activity, and it is across most district councils now, is in to planning applications rather than an active assessment of potentially contaminated sites. I take it from some of the responses already, but I just wanted to ask, was you have a list of potentially contaminated sites, but for which it isn't in the public domain for perfectly reasonable reasons. I can see possibly that if we really wanted to, as Commission, we might ask for a below the line discussion on that point, so as to understand at another meeting, so as to understand just what the main issues are within the district. But the level of contamination, certainly in my estimation, is probably pretty low by comparison nationally. But do you actually hold a list, though, of priority sites that you really do think may have contamination, and if resources were otherwise, that you would actively be looking to investigate? And then my last comment, which is purely picky, when reviewing this document, can we please get historic and historical correct? Because historic contamination would be something like Mount Vesuvius exploding. And I don't think we have historic levels of contamination within Breckland, but historical, we certainly have. So if that can be corrected, one of us would be very happy. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ian. You can never tell what the Romans were up to. Andrew, are you able to address the substantive comments in there?
Absolutely. Yes, we do have a list of sites. Primarily, we do use that to influence sort of how we respond to planning applications and various other things. And in some respects, obviously, as developments come along and they say we wish to develop a site that was, I don't know, whether it was near to a landfill site or whether it was near to an old timber preservation yard or something along those lines, then ultimately we will use that information to say, look, you as a developer need to investigate this and see whether there are issues that need to be addressed or whether your particular site needs to be cleared up. We do have a number of sites that could bear further investigation. The feature that we have to remember is that as soon as we go on site, we need to actually be proving that A, there is contamination there. Secondly, there is a pathway to a receptor, and then thirdly, that there is a receptor that's actually sort of present to actually receive it. The feature really is to actually determine a number of those. We need to actually do a number of sort of trial tests and analysis, and even based on a few years ago, ultimately, as soon as we start going on site and doing that analysis, we are into the realms of many thousands of pounds, potentially £10,000 per site. There used to be a mechanism where we could apply for government grant funding to actually undertake some of those investigations, but that dried up a number of years ago. Therefore, unless we have very specific issues, we tend to actually obviously use the planning process to actually address those costs. And ultimately, the top of our list is actually ever growing in terms of sort of more sort of immediate contamination, particularly around oil fuel spillages, where sort of there are leaks to oil tanks and overfilling and various other things that cause problems to surrounding local areas. My colleagues, whilst dealing with a large proportion of the issues through the planning process, are liaising with local people and with consultants and landowners to actually get a number of those oil spillages addressed, and that tends to be sort of where we are sort of addressing most of the issues at the moment. But ultimately, sort of if funding becomes available to do further investigations to some of the larger sites that aren't currently under a planning application, then we will obviously look at that. But the feature really is we are in sort of a situation where resources are very restricted, and therefore to start going off and looking at sites that aren't currently posing a huge issue probably is not an issue that we can actually chase at the moment. Hopefully that's sufficient.
Thank you, Andrew. That's great. Ian, do you have any further points?
Just very quickly, Chairman, which is understand the point. I would hope that that at any stage that the concern about a particular site does develop, not as a consequence of an application or anything, but for the information you have or the development nearby or whatever, that nonetheless you would be coming forward to make a case for the expenditure to do such an investigation, because it should be part of our responsibility. It's part of our statutory responsibility to make sure that these things are dealt with. But understand exactly the point. So I don't need a further response on that, but I do just hope that or make that point for the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. I don't think I have any other members wishing to speak, in which case I would like to make the recommendation slightly amended, which is that the Commission, consider the report and recommend that the draft strategy for consultation and subsequent approval, subject to the comments and points that we've identified today. I know we've had a couple of typographical and semantic points, but also there's the flow chart that you're going to look at, and then your definitions around current. If that's okay with you, Andrew, I'm looking just for a nod if you have it. Yeah, that's great. So our members, firstly, do I have a seconder for that recommendation? I've got Ian, and all those in favour, please. Thank you. Are there any against? I don't see any against the draft contaminated land strategy. That's heartening. And any abstentions? Again, I don't see any abstentions. So thank you, members. That is passed, and we thank Gordon and Andrew and the team for that report. And if you aren't required any further, then please do go forth and live your lives to the fullest extent you can in a Tier 2 lockdown. Item 10 is the 5-year housing land supply report. I will turn at first instance to Paul, I think, if he's here. There he is.
Yes, I am here, Chairman, but I've had serious issues with internet this morning. So before it crashes on me again, considering this is a good news story, I was looking forward to it. But if I could hand over before it crashes to Simon, that would be rather useful, please. I think in the best interest, and I'll stop my video so I don't, at least I can hear you, hopefully.
All right, thank you, Paul. Simon, if you have any opening comments or points you want to make to members, and then we will go to the subsequent catechism.
No, we were looking to just do a short presentation, if that's okay, 5-10 minutes, just to take you through it. Okay, so I'll hand over to Andy Darcy, who will share his screen and take you through it.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Andy.
Thank you. Yes, I'll try and share my screen. Can people see that?
We can, although yes, you could make it bigger, but I think we're doing so.
Yeah, is that okay?
That's great, thank you.
Right, this is the update, the annual update on the 5-year housing land supply position for Breckland. What I will very briefly take you through is why we have to do it, and then the two key elements of it, which are the number of houses that we would be required to find sites for, which takes account of historical completions, any shortfall in delivery in the local plan period, i.e. from 2011, and the application of a 5 or 10 or 20% buffer to that figure in accordance with the National Planning Policy Framework. And then, having established what the requirement is, we then look at what supply we consider could reasonably come forward over the next 5 years, looking at major sites, which are sites of 10 or more dwellings, smaller sites, any local plan allocations which don't yet have a planning approval attached to them, and windfalls, which are sites which are not allocated in any local plan and that come forward either as speculative or applications which the council then deem are appropriate for approval. And then we draw that together with some conclusions. So in terms of very briefly the context, we are required to identify and update annually a supply of deliverable sites to provide a minimum of 5 years worth of housing set against our housing requirement, which in our case is the adopted local plan. We are then obligated to apply a 5, 10 or 20% buffer to that figure. And importantly, we also need to demonstrate at the supply side that a site is deliverable within that 5-year window. So in terms of the housing requirement, the adopted local plan, adopted last November, a year ago now, is 612 dwellings per annum. So over the next 5 years, that equates to a figure requirement of 3,060 dwellings. We then look at the number of completions that we've had in the plan period, i.e. since 2011, and we note from those figures that we are 866 dwellings short in terms of delivery of where we should be at this point in time. We have to add essentially that figure, the 866 figure, to the 3060 figure under what's known as the Sedgefield approach, which is you add the whole of the 866 dwellings to the next 5-year period. Previously, the council have adopted what was known as the Liverpool approach, which sought to spread that shortfall over the remainder of the plan period. But common practice and government policy now is that you apply it over the next 5-year period. We then have to apply a buffer, 5, 10 or 20% to that figure
This was the members will be aware that we resubmitted the 5-year land supply report earlier in the week, and my apologies for that. We had a discussion as to what the most appropriate buffer was. In the original version, we concluded that 20% would be appropriate, and that was because of comments made by the inspector who looked at the local plan, who considered that would be an appropriate way forward for the housing land supply reports. However, we then assessed that against the requirement of the National Planning Policy Framework, which clearly points to the use of what's known as the housing delivery test for each district, and where for Breckland the housing delivery test figure is we have met over the past 3 years 117% of our requirements. So we've had quite a good period of supply over the past 3 years against requirement, and for a council who have had that good delivery over the past 3 years, we are only required to apply a 5% buffer to that figure. So the new report, the amended report, now seeks to apply that 5% buffer, but for information we have also included what the position would be had it been a 10 or 20% figure as well. And on all 3 counts, the conclusion is that we would have it in excess of a 5-year supply. So to sum up the requirement, we have the 5 years worth of 612 dwellings. We apply then the shortfall figure, and then we apply the 5% buffer to that, and that gives us a total requirement over the next 5 years of 4,122 dwellings. We then move on to the supply, and in terms of supply, sites that we have included or considered for inclusion are clearly sites that have planning permission, both major sites, 10 or more dwellings, and minor sites of less than 10. We then looked at allocations in the local plan, which are subject, in our view, subject to undetermined planning applications, which demonstrates to us that there is movement in terms of the delivery of those sites, and we consider that it would be reasonable to include some of those in the calculations, because a allocated site in the local plan is clearly deemed to be suitable for development already by virtue of being an allocation in the local plan. So it's sort of got over the first hurdle instead of just being a speculative application. And then we have looked at windfall developments, as I said, sites which aren't allocations. We have a lot of windfall developments in Breckland historically, and there is the National Planning Policy Framework allows for us to make allowances for future windfalls over the next 5 years based on those historical trends. So in terms of the starting point for this, in October this year, which is the base date for this figure, there were outstanding or extant planning permissions for 13,533 dwellings on major sites, a significant number of dwellings, although that does include 9,000 on the 2 sustainable urban extensions at Thetford and Attleborough, both of which now have planning permission. And there were outstanding planning permissions for 978 dwellings on small sites, minor sites. And there are 617 dwellings remaining in the local plan without consent. So we have a significant amount, the council have granted a lot of, approved a lot of planning applications for dwellings over recent years, which gives us a very strong starting point in terms of looking at the supply over the next 5 years. So we essentially tried to contact all of the developers and agents of major sites to try and ascertain from them what their delivery rates would be over the next 5 years. We had a pretty good response from some of them, and we have included where deliveries have been confirmed by those developers or agents. We've included those figures within the report itself. Where we haven't received confirmation, despite efforts to get confirmation, we have taken a cautious approach in our view by putting the figures in that the council thinks will be delivered, but applying a 25% discount on those figures to make some allowance for where we might be too optimistic, for example. Small sites with planning applications, we have allowed for 886 of those to come forward. That is a 10% discount rate or lapse rate on the total number of small sites, minor sites that have got planning permission. To again, we know that some will fall by the wayside, not be developed or not come forward for a number of reasons. So again, historically, we've always applied a 10% lapse rate, so we continue to do that. Again, as I said before, there are some sites in the local plan which have undetermined planning applications which are still going through the system. Again, we have applied a cautious approach of 25% discount to those, and that would give us a figure of 216. And in terms of windfalls, which are both on major sites and minor sites, have historically been quite high in the district, we have made an allowance for a total of 242 dwellings over the 5-year period, starting in year 3, because we don't want to be accused of double counting with potentially some of the small sites that already have permission. So doing all of the maths and the report does go into a lot more detail on all of these. That gives us a total of 5,724 dwellings that we consider could be delivered over the next 5 years in the district. And there's just a breakdown of those categories. The major sites by year, 4,380, minor sites, and the allocations and windfalls that over the next 5-year period give you that total figure. Applying that then to the requirement, the table on the slide sets out the requirement based on a 5% buffer of 4,122 dwellings, or an annual requirement of 824, and then the supply part of that, 5,724, which gives us a 5-year supply figure of 6.95 years. So in our opinion, using this report, applications for housing moving forward will then be considered under as the starting point, the local plan policies on housing that will be deemed to be up to date and applicable. So in conclusion, with a 5% buffer applied, we have a 6.95 years. Were a 10% or 20% buffer be applied, that would reduce to 6.6 or 6.07. However, still significantly over the magic 5 figure. Applying the 5% figure, that gives us a surplus, if you like, of 1,602 dwellings. So were this to be challenged at a future planning appeal, any appellant who wish to question it would seek to have to reduce the total number of supply by at least 1,602 dwellings in order to get the figure below 5. I won't refer back to the table earlier in the slide that looked at it on a year-by-year basis, but it is clear that to deliver this sort of figure, we'll need a step change in delivery from 22-23 to well over 1,000 houses to be delivered each year, something which hasn't happened in Breckland, certainly in recent years, but it is in line with national figures. Members will be aware of the recent white paper that's been referred to earlier in the year that set or proposed a very high housing figure of over 1,000 houses a year for Breckland. We don't know the final outcome of that yet, but clearly there is a push to boost the housing supply both nationally and within Breckland. And interestingly as well, the projected rates for the next 5 years are pretty similar, notwithstanding COVID over this year and potentially the first part of next year, to the overall local plan trajectory, which approved by the inspector into the local plan, similarly does look at a step change in delivery over the next 5 years. So it ties in with that. The unknowns, we don't know clearly at the moment what the continuing impact of COVID or any linked or unlinked general recession may be. And we don't know yet what our new Breckland housing figure will be. The government have yet to publish those final standard housing figures. And again, the implications that would be for 5-year supply calculations moving forward. We do consider that we have applied a cautious approach to our figures, despite the high projected delivery rates, by applying a 25% discount on some of the major and allocated sites, and again 10% discount or lapse rates on small sites. And for example, where a major site has outline consent and there is a need for reserve matters to be submitted for consideration by the local planning authority, or for conditions to be discharged, we're not expecting any delivery from outline major sites until at least 2022-23, and even then only a small delivery of 25 dwellings per annum. This report will be updated after the end of the monitoring year, which is March next year. It is, as I say in conclusion, considered to be robust, but it is likely to be challenged at future planning appeals. And obviously the caveat is that the planning inspectorate may disagree with our position. There are just a couple of minor typographical errors that I have found subsequently in the report, particularly in table 5B, but that doesn't change the overall figures for the report before you, and they will be tweaked before we finally publish it. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I will turn to members for any questions. Robert, I've seen. Roger has already mentioned he would like to speak. Ian, I see. And I have Tim as well. So if we start with Robert, please.
Thank you, Chairman. In Appendix 4, the windfall analysis, the 2011-2012 total of 32 should be 302, which takes the total windfalls from 4073 to 4343, and the average from 370 to 395. Therefore, and the 82% should be 80.2%. So I think some more proofreading is required. I'd also like a comment that with a district with a large and expensive planning department, 80.2% of delivery is from windfall sites, which makes you wonder what is the cost of providing that 19.8% planned delivery. Thank you.
Who, Andy, would like to comment? Well, firstly, are you happy that that is a correct revision?
Yeah, I will check that and make any required changes to that appendix.
And do you have a comment on Robert's point around planned versus windfall delivery? And Harry, I have seen you.
The only comment I would make is that we would expect windfalls, especially on major sites, to reduce now that we have an adopted local plan in place that has the allocations in it. Also, in addition to that, now that we are recommending that we do have a robust 5-year land supply report, again, that is likely to reduce speculative windfall applications on major sites that do tend to come forward more in authorities that can't demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing land. There will always be windfall development in rural districts, such as Breckland, and it is likely that these will continue, but mainly I would suggest now on smaller sites, whilst the council can demonstrate a 5-year supply of land.
Thank you, Andy. Just before you come back, Robert, Harry, I have seen you, so thank you. You can put your fingers down, I mean. Robert, yes, do you want to come back on your points?
Well, I look forward to seeing the figures corrected. It does make me wonder whether our forward projection on windfalls is understating the level at which they will still come in at.
Great, thank you. Roger, you're next.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Andy, for that comprehensive report. That is indeed encouraging news. I do have 3 questions, if I may, Chair. 2 of them are quite brief, and then the last one probably it will either be Simon Wood or Councillor Clausen might like to answer that for me. So the first one is on page 78 of the report, paragraph 2.9. Can you explain why we are concerned about maintaining house prices and profit margins for developers as opposed to increasing supply and reducing house prices? Because you know, I'm all for builders making money, but I'm not sure that that's our overriding objective here as a council. Surely it's in everybody's interests to reduce house prices to make them more affordable. You know, an Englishman's home is his castle. We need to make that as easy as we can for people to purchase their own homes if they wish to do so. So I'm slightly concerned by that text. It actually says for outline sites, the maximum number of dwellings anticipated in 2022-23 is 25 dwellings per outlet. This figure is then increased to a maximum of build out of 50 dwellings per annum that reflects the current market and build out of 50 to 60 per year, quote, to maintain prices and sustain demand. The council considers that any higher numbers would be self-defeating as it would oversupply the market, reducing house prices and profit margins. I'm not entirely comfortable that that's something this council should be concerned with. I would think we need to be building more houses, and obviously we can demonstrate we've got in excess of a 6-year land supply, which is great. And obviously the more supply would hopefully reduce the prices to the consumer. So that's one concern I have. The other question I had for Andy was, Andy, can you tell me when the strategic housing market assessment is due for review? Has a date been set for that? Because I think that could have an impact on housing delivery. I don't know, Chair, if you want to take those 2 first, and then I'll come to my final one.
Yes, I do. Although I might say, Roger, if you manage to succeed in your mission of reducing everyone's house prices, I can see a lot of negative equity happening in the district of Breckland. But I take your point, and no doubt Andy will have a response on the stated objective for council versus house prices. And do you want to cover off those 2 quick points, and then we'll go back to Roger for his third question?
The second one first, which is straightforward. In terms of the market, the strategic housing market assessment, essentially, along with the other districts within Norfolk, because we do it jointly, we're waiting on the any final decisions of government about what our new housing requirement will be, because that will clearly be a massively significant part of that work as the starting point for what our need will be. It was scheduled to start by the end of this year, but with the proposed new figures, which not just for Breckland are different for a lot of authorities within Norfolk, it was deemed to be more prudent to wait until the new year when we know what the implications of any set targets will be for the districts. So it is work that is programmed. I haven't got a date. It would depend on when the government produce those final housing figures or targets, but it is scheduled to be done. In terms of the comments about supply, the housing essentially in Breckland is delivered by private house builders who are there to make a profit. You know, the Persimmon Homes of this world, and we have to try and demonstrate that what we are proposing is a prudent and robust set of supply. So developers will not build houses where there is market saturation, for example, or where there is no demand. So as much as we would potentially like them to build lots and lots and lots of houses, they will either mothball a site or not start a site where there is, unless there is they can identify a demand for people to buy those houses. So I think what the report is trying to do is to simply take account of that, to say what we can't, what won't happen is that every site will be all developed at the same time, unless the Persimmon Homes of this world have perceive there to be a market and for them to be able to make a profit, because they are private companies at the end of the day. So that's the reasoning behind that, is in terms of 25 dwellings per annum for the first year, and then the general market delivery rate from an outlet is, as it says, between 50 and 60 houses per annum, because that is where the private developers perceive is the right number for them to be able to sell.
Thank you, Andy. Roger, I'll let you briefly come back on that, although I feel like there's probably not going to be agreement in terms of the council's objective there.
No, I appreciate Andy's response. I think what I'll do is I'll write to Andy and probably ask something that I'd like a little bit more information on outside of this forum. I can take that up with him directly. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. And what is your other question? Okay,
so this is all great news at the moment. We have a 5-year land supply at the moment. My concern is where we're going to be in 3-4 years from now. And some of our policies in our local plan, Simon Wood's already confirmed to me in writing, some of those policies are going to be probably out of date or start going out of date in the next 2 or 3 years. So having said that, it's really important that we carry on the work of reviewing our local plan and making sure our policies are as up to date as quickly as possible. I'm a bit concerned at the moment at our apparent inaction over the last few months. I understand the reasoning with regard to the government's white paper. I understand that we have written to the minister asking for a response. But I was quite struck by the government's chief planning officer wrote to all councils in a newsletter on the 1st of October. And I'll just quickly read you this passage. In it, she says, "One of the key messages I would like to convey is please don't let uncertainty stop you from progressing your work, particularly in respect to the preparation of your plans for the area of your project. It is important that we do not lose momentum and that we have strong plans which can facilitate our recovery from the impact of the pandemic, and importantly, that addresses our community's housing needs and the economic challenges that lie ahead." Now, last I heard, planning Rebecca Collins confirmed to me, I think 2 weeks ago, that we still hadn't received a response from the minister, and we seem to be in a state of limbo at the moment. I'm concerned that if we don't get that review work done as soon as possible, some developers may take that as a signal that they will just hang things out, wait for these policies to carry less weight, and that could have a drag on our delivery rates in sort of the next 3 or 4 years. So just wondering what the plan is to move this local plan review forward so we can keep the momentum going and look at the district and our plan for development over the next plan period.
Thank you, Roger. Harry, can I check, have you got a point of order you want to raise, or is your finger just errantly waving?
No, I want to make a comment, a couple of observations and also a couple of questions for Andy or Simon or Paul. Thank you.
That's fine. Okay, so I've got Ian, then I've got Tim, then I have you, Harry. I just wanted to make sure that wasn't something you wanted to come in on a motion. Roger, thank you for your lengthy point, slightly too lengthy possibly. Simon or...
Nevertheless, it needs to be made, Chairman.
And
this
indeed
is
it has.
This is the forum to do it.
Indeed it has been. So Paul or Simon, do either of you wish to comment on Roger's statement / question?
I'm quite happy to come back on that if Councillor Clausen is content for me to do so.
Yes, Simon, I'm quite happy, but I think, Roger, the letter that you're referring to is very much for the bulk of the country that isn't us. It's people having to complete their local plans was the strong steer that we were hearing. And so we're in a different position.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Simon, if you come back then.
Yeah, just to say that at the moment we do have an up-to-date local plan, and I think I would agree with Paul that that the letter was aimed at those authorities that either don't have an up-to-date local plan or some way down the route to getting their local plan, and not to hold on to that. I know the Greater Norwich plan is at a fairly advanced stage, and they were questioning whether or not they continue with that, and took the view that they would continue. I think what we need to do is to be aware of the timescale for the government bringing forward their review, their reforms rather, and if those reforms are significantly delayed, then we will need to reappraise the position that we're in. At the moment, we have a 5-year housing land supply that will ensure that our plan policies are given full weight, and that will enable us to make decisions at the moment in accordance with the local plan. A long hiatus in terms of the local plan review is not something that we would encourage, but equally we don't want to be wasting council time and money in doing work that may subsequently prove to be abortive, and it's getting that balance right, Chairman.
Thank you, Simon. Roger, you've had quite a lot of time. I will allow you a very brief comeback if you wish to make one, or otherwise you can take it offline if that would be more satisfactory for you.
Yeah, very quickly, Chairman. I appreciate all the comments that Simon's just made, but I just think we're at a stage now where the hiatus in the work that we need to do can't continue indefinitely. We need to put a plan in place now as to when we are going to resume that work, because at the moment we're not doing it. And there is work there that I believe can be done, whether we hear from the government or not. There is still work we can do to review our policies, probably to look to improve them in the future. So I'd like to know how long this is going to go on.
Thank you, Roger. I'm going to leave that there and let you continue that line of questioning outside of the meeting. Ian, you're next. Sorry, that's Ian Martin.
No, I was making notes, Chairman. Thank you. Apologies. Yes, first off, this is brilliant news, and it's not something necessarily all of us had been anticipating, particularly with COVID. So hats off to Andy and to Simon in getting this together, and what hopefully will be represented as being a thoroughly robust position. Got a couple of comments. Just to reassure colleagues that the statement that was 5-year land supply statement that was agreed in November used the 5% buffer. It illustrated what it would be with 10% and 20%, but it did use the 5% buffer, and this statement is using the same buffer, so it's consistent rather than diluting it. And I think that's a point of reassurance that hopefully people will appreciate. I picked up certainly the point about windfalls, and looking at the numbers, they feel understated. But that's a challenge as much as anything for Andy and Simon to review when they're going back through this. The point, I think one of the things that Roger was just alluding to was, forgive me for raising it, was INF 03, which means that even if we have a 5-year land supply, our housing policies become out of date as at the end of November 2022. So there isn't a huge amount of time. And lastly, there are a number of appeals in process at the moment where the 5-year land supply has either been challenged or referenced. At what stage can we, or are we able, with the draft statement to put this to the relevant inspectors to assist with those appeals. Thank you.
On the basis of Paul's unfortunate connection situation, I'll go to Simon first for responses, and Paul, if you want to come in, then do after Simon.
Thank you, Chairman. Just moving backwards, in terms of appeals that are in the system, Councillor, we have advised the planning inspector of the current position using the draft report, so they will have reference to that in making their decision. So we have already gone through that process. Just in terms of INFO 3, and just to crave indulgence for 2 minutes in response to that point and to the point Councillor Atwell made, there is work that we are doing and can be doing and have planned to do to underpin any review that we do over the next 2 to 3 years. So we're aware of that deadline, and we're aware of the risks that poses. If we have a 5-year housing land supply at that time, then that will give our policies significant more weight than if we didn't. What I would say is that having a 5-year housing land supply does not mean that we can stop granting planning consent. We still need to be able to do so. But I say that there is work being undergone and ongoing in terms of the local plan review work.
Thank you, Simon. Ian, do you want to come back on anything, or are you satisfied? Excellent, thank you. In which case, Tim, you're next.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, good news at the moment. Very pleased to receive the report. I did notice the step change in deliveries in a couple of years' time. And I think that reflects on what Roger was saying about the house builder profit in that section 2.9. It shows how we are not in full control of actually whether we can deliver these or not. I really do feel for the difficulty here in that it's this profit that drives the number of deliveries, and we don't have any control of that. Just one typographical issue. I think on page 86, table 2, the last column is the shortfall against the local plan. I think we have all our signs the wrong way round. So if we have a negative shortfall, then we've over-delivered. But I think you probably will just want to flip all those negatives to positives and vice versa. You're muted, Rodri.
Oh, apologies. That was a rookie. I was saying, Simon, do you have anything you would like to say in response to Tim's points?
Just very quickly, I would agree with him that the ability of the council to insist on delivery is limited, but we have done our part as a council in granting planning consents, and all we can do is represent the figures that are there in front of us, and work with government and work with developers to bring sites forward.
Thank you, Simon. Tim, I haven't seen you wave, so I assume you are content. Excellent. In which case, Harry, you are next. And
thank you.
And Roger, if no one else wants to speak, I'll come back to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, I sort of welcome the report and the fact that we seem to have got a good 5-year land supply and a buffer using the 5%. I've got 2 or 3 observations, comments, and then also a specific question. It's certainly going to be challenging, which has been referenced before, in terms of delivering more houses than we've done before, because we've, looking at report table 1, we've delivered around about 793 top WAC. So going to around about 1470 is going to be challenging. In terms of the windfalls and completions, I know certainly that touching on Councillor Attlewell's point, I agree entirely that we need the delivery rate and the build-out rate to go up. But realistically, as Simon has alluded to, we are dependent on the developers. So, for example, my understanding is that the Dereham housing market will only probably tolerate about 50 completions a year. That's the rate, for example, that Hitling View was built out. So if we've got, say, 7, 8 developers, they're not all going to put their houses up at the same time. So we get supply outstripping demand. So that's the sort of basic economics. Looking at the major deliveries, my maths may be wrong. Looking at the year 22-23, Thetford is delivering 144 units, and 23-24, 134, which seems to be roughly half the rate for Dereham. So that just seems odd that in an area which is an SOE, which is Thetford, is potentially delivering less. But I'll put some of those points in case I've not looked at the revised document to Andy and Simon. The actual question I've got is around Appendix 1. And there's, if you like, an example of email around development in Swaffham, 175 houses. In the past, we've always had, the last year, we had issues around resources in establishing the declaration of the supply, which we've obviously partly overcome this year, fortunately. Looking at the email there around the Swaffham examples, it asks developers to sort of confirm where they are, if you like, the build out rate, and whether they are changing any of those figures and or timescales. So my question would be, and I'm happy to have that in writing unless it's at the top of anyone's fingertips, is how many sort of those major emails have been sent out? How many did we get back? How many then altered their figures so they maybe pushed the envelope along further in terms of changing the timescales? And have we used that discount figure, before? Obviously, we're dependent on what we're told in terms of those build-out rates. But I know in the past we've been, which isn't our fault as a planning authority, but we have been let down on some of those projections, which may be over-optimistic or pessimistic. You can take a punt on those. That's my observations and my only question, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Simon?
Thank you. I'll ask Andy if he's got a comment on that, if that's all right.
Thank you. In terms of the major sites and the confirmation to the emails, etc., the appendix to the 5-year land supply report breaks down the major sites by those where we've had confirmed delivery, and then in a separate table those where we've not had a response to our requests. So be able to get a general idea there of the numbers that responded. We did contact known applicants and agents for all of the major sites, i.e. sites of 10 or more, with an outstanding permission in Breckland, and I haven't had a look at the tables off the top of my head, but it's in the region of around half and half in terms of response. It's probably slightly less responded. Of those that did respond, and again I don't have the specific figures, very few amended the figures. Most thought that they were reasonable. So that's just a general comment on thinking that our figures were probably generally okay in what we thought. What else? In terms of the Thetford Dereham delivery figures, again, I think, yes, there are a significant number of more dwellings with planning permission in Thetford because of the sustainable urban extension. But in Dereham, there are a number of different sites, if you like. They're not all concentrated on a few sites, as is the case in Thetford. And I think all we can do in the report is to look at what sites we have and seek to apply a delivery figure from each of those. But the report will be monitored and will be updated again following the end of the monitoring year next March. So it will be interesting to see what happens in the remainder of this year and the first part of next year in terms of those delivery of those major sites, including the where delivery has been confirmed by the agent or the applicant.
Thank you, Andy.
Just a quick come back on that, Chairman.
Yes, is everyone else hearing me okay? I got some very strange feedback. Okay, go back on that, Harry.
Just a quick comeback on that. Yeah, thanks very much for that explanation, Andy. Obviously, part of the question was in the email we're sending about if we don't hear back from developers, then you said around about 50% we haven't heard back from. You made the assumption that those figures in there correct. I'd really just trying to understand for my benefit, and obviously anyone listening, is that the figure that you put in there, build-up rate, is that factoring in a 25% discount to give us a bit of caution if we haven't heard back from anybody? Obviously, when we have the next update, it will be. We hope very much that those people will have, replied back to you. I appreciate it's it's a fluid situation. Thank you.
Yeah, on all of the unconfirmed sites, they're the sites that we've applied a 25% discount on. Where delivery has been confirmed, whether altered or not by developers or agents, we put that down as a 100% figure with no discount. So the caution is on the unconfirmed sites.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, great. I see Philip has indicated. I don't see anyone else. So Philip, if you come in, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask, I'm sure it's a question that's been asked before, but we almost seem to have a 15-year land supply with over 13,500 units planned. Is there nothing more we can do to ensure there's actual delivery once we've given planning permission?
Andy?
Simon?
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor. I think we need to remember that around 9,000 of those houses are within the two SUEs, Attleborough and Thetford. And as you'll be aware, we are working in Thetford to deliver power to bring the sustainable urban extension forward to a quicker rate than it would have been if we hadn't been proactive in delivering power, and that's set to come on stream in March 2022. In Attleborough, we've just only granted planning consent for that within the last 6 months, and we're working with the developer to start moving forward the link road, trying to get funding in place with them through bodies like Homes England, working with the county council to try and deliver that. And we're working closely to ensure that we have as speedy a delivery as we can on those. We also work with our colleagues in housing to identify stalled sites and try and work with landowners and developers to understand why those sites have stalled and to try and unlock them. So we are doing what we can within the constraints that we have, Chairman.
Thank you very much for that. Philip, you're happy? Good. In which case, I've seen no other indications except from Roger. So Roger, if I could ask, would you mind being brief? Because I would like to try and get to the flagship item before Tim has to go.
Yes, very quickly. Thank you, Simon, for indicating that your officers are working on the local plan review. So I'd like to know who's providing the oversight for that work. When can we find out exactly what it is that your officers are actually working on? Because without a local plan group actually meeting, I'm wondering what you're working on, what timeline, etc. So if you could let us know, probably you need to write to me outside this forum. I'd be most grateful.
Simon, is that the case? Are you going to be writing, or you give your answer now?
I'm quite happy to write to Councillor Attwell and give him the indication of the work that we're doing. The work that we're doing will be around compiling evidence bases and things of that nature, and the input of the local plan working group would be fairly limited at the moment. But I can let you know that, Councillor.
Thank you very much for that. That's helpful. I don't see any other indications on this item. If members are therefore happy, we will note the contents, agree that it represents the current position of the council, and agree the use of the report in development management decision making. I'm not sure we can actually agree the use of the report in development management decision making. I don't think we have that power as scrutiny. but certainly as far as we have those powers, I would like to propose that we adhere to the recommendations in the report. Do I have a seconder for that? I've got Mark, and could I see all those in favour, please? Thank you. Any against? I see no against. Any abstentions? I see no abstentions. Okay, so that is carried. Thank you. Tim, I hope you don't mind. I've noted your point that you need to leave by 12:30. So if members are content, or indeed even if you're not content, I propose to jump to item 14, which is the councillor call for action. Can I firstly say how delighted I am that another member has used the powers of councillor call for action. It's good not to only be me. So I will start briefly with Tim to let him make a statement before he has to go, and then we can do this item.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm delighted to take this up at your recommendations over the years. Yes, so Flagship have had a data leak or an issue, a virus attack or a phishing attack, which means that they have been unable to collect tenants' rents for a while, and there's been a great deal of confusion amongst some of the tenants, some of whom have contacted me, some of whom have contacted David Wickerson, and we were aware that the situation was unclear, which is why we wanted to bring this forward now. It's one of these where some of the tenants, look, many are fine, but some of them are feeling rather left out, unsure about what's happened, whether there's going to be future financial problems imposed on them. Now, I'm aware that Flagship have actually contacted all the tenants, and they have offered them Equifax, I think it is, membership for a year, so they can keep an eye on their credit ratings and see if there's any undue activity on their accounts. That's all good. But nevertheless, I think it's important that we ask them to be more clear about what has happened. And I listed a number of questions that I'd like to ask. This was at very short notice, and I am pleased that they've managed to come back with a holding response for today, which has been distributed by email to people. Nevertheless, I think it would be worthwhile if we ask them to attend and answer the questions in more detail at our next meeting. The response is just a holding response, and I would say that evidence from this ransomware attack that they've given us the name of it. I did actually have a look at the group of people who actually did that attack, and it's a number of previous hacker groups that have got together, and previously they have posted data which has been harvested on forums. So I think with the history of what they do, it certainly is perhaps too soon to say that there's no evidence of a leak or data being copied. And that's the sort of clarity I think that we perhaps would like for our tenants or their tenants, our residents, so that they can be sure as to who needs to worry and worry about what. I think that's probably just where we are at the moment, but perhaps want to actually just pick this up again back in January 2021.
Thank you, Tim. And I think it's a very worthwhile issue to have brought to scrutiny. David, I did you a disservice in not referencing you. Of course, it was also your councillor call for action. Do you have anything you want to say? You're on mute at the moment. But is there anything you want to add to Tim's comments?
No, well, not, excuse me, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not really. Tim and I have been in constant contact on this particular issue because it was of concern to various residents. And yes, we do have that letter from them, but of course, we don't know the content of the letter that when they say they've written to all our customers, we're not privy to exactly what was in that correspondence to reassure the customers that they were safe. And I take Tim's comment about the grouping that's involved with this. And in the past, quite sensitive information has been disclosed on various sites. So I don't think we can put this one to bed as yet. They do say that they're going to make a further statement following the conclusion. So I think we should I don't know whether, in fact, anybody has responded to this email that they've sent in, but I think we should respond as the ONS, stating that we look forward to their further detailed information on this to reassure ourselves and their tenants that, in fact, there is no risk of information being disclosed to third parties, because that hasn't actually yet been qualified. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Obviously, we've had the holding response, which Tim has already referred to. I don't propose to read it for the benefit of the public at this meeting unless members strongly object, given that it is only a holding response. But I would propose that we append it as part of the agenda item in January so that the public are able to see where we've got to, and hopefully we'll also be able to have flagship in. What I would like to ask is an indication from members that they are happy that we take this item further in January and we invite flagship to come and speak on the matter. Teresa, before I do that, then you have a comment?
Sorry, Chairman, I can see that Councillor Webb wishes to speak, please.
Oh, Councillor Webb. Oh, right.
Hello, thank you very much for allowing me to speak. Okay, I just wanted to give you a bit of an update from the Breckland housing side of things. I have asked for the team to pull together social housing providers forums by March, which I think will help this a lot, this situation, because at the moment we've got different housing providers that some of them are coming up with really good practice, which is not being shared. Some of them have got issues, as you've alluded to here, which also the learning needs to be shared across. So as far as Breckland's concerned, thank you for raising it. Yes, it's a really good idea to bring the bag in as far as I'm concerned. But as I said, I wanted you to understand that from the Breckland perspective, we're also doing it wider across the social housing providers as a forum, which can provide feedback, not only to us, but to each other as well to improve the situation. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Alison. That's great. In which case, I'll go back to my original trail, which was, could members indicate, are you happy for us to bring this item back in January and invite flagship in to try to address the questions that feature on our agenda today? A show of hands would be great. I see lots in favour. Is there anyone viscerally against the idea? Can't see anyone. Or abstaining on the matter. That is fine. Okay, so if Tim and David are content, we will park that item now and come back to it in January. But thank you again for bringing in the Councillor Call for Action. Tim, I think we're about to lose you, so thank you for your contributions today. And we will go back to item 11, which is the COVID-19 business grants. Apologies, Andrew, and the team for having bumped you down the agenda, but you are now ready to shine. So if I think you're going to do a presentation, is that correct?
Chairman, sorry, could I just interrupt?
Sorry, yes, go ahead.
Just
yeah,
I've got several questions, but I do dislike when you do a scrutiny, we're all operating from hindsight, and I think it'd be fair from the officers, because none of us could have foreseen having to deal with this. They had the opportunity at the end and did say what they felt they'd done right and what they'd felt they'd done wrong. And I think that will also stop you hearing any more of my voice than you need to as well. Thank you.
Sorry, Fabian, just to be clear, was that on the item we're about to do?
Yes, this is on the COVID grants, yeah.
Got it. Okay. Well, indeed, you are really not allowing hindsight to take place here, having not had the report yet. But that's excellent. Thank you for your point. Andrew, if you would like to kick off, and I think, is it Alison is helping out on this one? Is it a dual team manoeuvre?
Absolutely, yes, Chair.
So yes, I'm in your hands.
Super, thank you. So we have submitted a report, but we've got a short presentation just to sort of draw out the headlines, if that's all right. So he says, getting to his presentation. Sorry, Chair. So hopefully you can see this. So just to talk you through some of the key headlines of this. So we're here to talk to you about COVID-19 business grants as a slight sort of health warning. Two areas that we can't go into in significant detail. That's individual cases and individual grant awards, and also some of the details of the assurance work and specifics about checking, just because there are equivalents of these schemes live at the moment, but hopefully there's still plenty to cover off. So the substantive update for you today is in regard to what's effectively now phase 1 of the national grant scheme around COVID funding for businesses. So that's principally the grants that have been made available to small businesses, those in receipt of small business rate relief, and also businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure sector. This has been a national scheme, but where local authorities have effectively been asked to administer and apply the criteria set out. So Breckland's had a key role in the effective distribution and delivery of this scheme. This is spelled out in a little more detail in the report, but just to sort of talk to how the team here at Breckland responded to this ask. So all of this has come upon us very quickly and at pace, certainly in the early days of the pandemic and the response. The approach that Breckland took was to establish a joint team of staff across Regen, Anglia Revenue Partnerships and the finance team. And over the time of this grant programme, those teams were increased significantly. One of the features of this council over the last month since the pandemic has been staff being very agile and mobily deployed to key priorities, and business support alongside the community support has been one of the key elements of that. Part of our redeployment of staff was particularly around making sure we had enough capacity, not only to process grants, but particularly to make sure that those businesses that are eligible for grants were aware of it and coming forwards. We will talk to this in a bit more detail, but effectively one of the significant challenges that all local authorities faced in this was we knew broadly the kinds of businesses that were eligible, but reaching them and making sure that they knew that and they were confirming to us their eligibility was a challenge, not least given a lot of them were shut. So with a dedicated team around this, we worked with social media, emails, phone calls. We did one of our largest ever mail drops to businesses, and where needed, we even did in-person visits to sort of no stone unturned in reaching eligible businesses and making sure that they were aware of support available. On top of that, behind the scenes, we ran a detailed assurance process to mitigate the risk of frauds, which has been a feature nationally for this scheme, but fortunately not for us locally. We also set up a dedicated appeals and queries process. One of the lessons we learned very quickly in this was, whilst the spirit of the intention behind the government support was quite clear, there's quite a lot of complicated practicalities in terms of eligibility. And working within the guidance, we adopted an approach of working with businesses to find ways to make them as eligible as possible to maximise the amount of money we were pushing out. A little later into the experience, we were enabled through additional resource from the government to top up our approach with a discretionary scheme, which we effectively applied to mean that those businesses that weren't eligible under the terms of the RHLG and SBG were able to receive some support. And that was particularly focused around businesses that weren't on the rate system. So, for example, market traders or those who are in a shared space, as well as home-based workers. Throughout, our approach has been characterised by working at pace to get schemes live as quickly as possible and to get finance out as quickly as possible to businesses. That has meant use of some of the COVID and emergency powers in terms of decision making. Obviously, in that, if we were anywhere near a normal course of things, these are the kind of policy approaches that we would have designed over many months and brought through all of the normal committees. But by necessity, the team have had to work at pace here. I know some members of ONS have sort of experienced some of this firsthand, but just to give you a very brief snapshot of what this looks like from a user experience. So this is taken from one of our current grant forms, so less so the phase 1 grants, but we have designed the application confirmation process with as much speed and agility in mind as possible. And that's one of the lessons we've kept learning and reapplying the more we do these schemes. So at the moment, under the scheme that's set up to support businesses that are impacted by the national restrictions that have just ended, applicants need to log on to our website and click that Start Grant Application form. They fill out effectively 11 relatively simple questions, and if we use that information to match their eligibility, if there's gaps in that information or challenges in what they've told us, we don't automatically decline anyone. We go back to them and check. Because one of the things we've learned throughout this is making things as simple as possible for businesses is an important part of making this process work. In terms of sort of evaluating the scheme itself and Breckland's performance in it, I guess there's a few ways that can be done. The numbers are in the report, so I won't talk to you them in detail, but I think perhaps a key thing to emphasize is throughout the initial phases of the national grant schemes, one of the numbers that was called upon on and tracked on a weekly basis was how well authorities were doing in paying out against the total percentage of potentially eligible businesses. From getting our scheme up and running within the first 10 days of funding being confirmed, Breckland throughout was in the sort of higher end of performance in that measure. More significantly, from our perspective, we've consistently been able to pay the vast majority of those who are eligible with a rapid turnaround, certainly once we got our systems fully up and running. And by the end and the closure of the scheme, of those who'd come forward to us within that were eligible, effectively all were paid. The gap in how we had money left over and how there was a difference between our estimated eligible pot and those that we paid is largely explained by the fact that a number of businesses who could have been eligible chose not to accept the money, and that's particularly for reasons like state aid. So national chains were technically eligible, but if they accepted all the grants from all of the councils that they operated in, that they'd exceed state aid limits, and indeed some felt it wasn't appropriate to do so. Positively, we've had very, very low incidents of detected fraud, and we've worked with the police, with recovery agencies on those small areas where they have happened. We have had high levels of positive feedback from businesses. We are aware that throughout there have been challenges, and they've particularly come for businesses around eligibility, where there's been either gaps in them appearing on rate systems, which is one of the key eligibility requirements, or confusion about some of the specific rules and regulations. In terms of how we have reflected on this experience ourselves and the lessons we've learned and sort of lessons we've taken from this. So a few things to emphasize at the top. So first of all, that the national approach here has been a real positive reflection on how local government can work effectively. When the schemes were first announced, there's queries about whether this would just be better administered through HMRC or one of the a national infrastructure level, but through experience, local authorities have been able to apply a level of local expertise and local insight that's made businesses more able to access support. The work in reaching a significant amount of businesses and getting all of this money out has been a significant achievement for the whole Breckland team, and I particularly include in that local members who are incredibly helpful in making sure that people on their patch were aware of this and challenging us if they felt we'd missed people who should be eligible. Nationally, the design of the scheme has had some challenges, and I think whilst the spirit and the intention behind what is trying to be achieved is very, very clear, there are a number of constraints in the deployment, particularly around criteria of having to be on a rate system, which haven't worked well for every single business, but we have attempted to apply the spirit and the intention behind this at all times. Key lessons that we have taken from this and sort of now continually apply to our work. One was around data in terms of both the quality and accessibility of those of our core data sources. So we rely heavily on the rates database to run these schemes, and in doing so, it's apparent there were gaps in some information that have now been plugged. And in fairness, the whole system has been used in a way that it was never intended to. There's also a lesson about relationships and communication with businesses. So one of our early challenges was we just didn't have an easy mechanism. We couldn't pick up the phone to every business because we didn't have all of their details. Again, significantly that's been plugged, but it's something we're working at and sort of linked to data. And then finally, lessons around pace and ease of process. We have always throughout this process tried to balance how easy it is for a business to engage against the sort of necessary checks and balances that we need to take. Every time we launch a scheme, we make it a little bit shorter and a little bit simpler. And positively, we've continually seen very low levels of fraud, but that's, again, a balance we continue to make and a lesson we continue to apply. Since the phase one schemes, just to sort of bring ONS fully up to speed. So, and this is a feature of life at the moment, there's a lot of this activity happening. During the national restrictions, which have just come to an end, we were empowered to run a similar scheme entitled LRSG Closed. Positively applying our lessons again, we were one of the first in East Anglia to launch that scheme and have paid out around 80% already to date. Again, tracking as one of the first and one of the fastest in that space. Similarly, again, under the tier 2 restrictions we now find ourselves in, we are able to offer further specific support, particularly to businesses that are open but not necessarily able to fully trade in the way they would because of restrictions. Again, applying those lessons of pace and ease. Yesterday, we launched a scheme on day one of these restrictions. I am yet to find a new tier 2 authority that has done that. So I'm confident we're sort of at the sort of front end of the pack in that context. We have, on a result, through this engagement, we've effectively had a relationship and a dialogue with businesses in a way that we have not, certainly in recent years, and we have attempted to maximize and leverage that as best we can. So we've used this information to enrich our databases and to have more of a conversation with those businesses about what support they need. In the autumn, we concluded our biggest ever engagement exercise in that regard, and with almost 1,000 individual businesses feeding back to us, we've been redesigning some of the way we offer support, and in particular, that's led to us identifying funding and spinning up some of our own grant schemes to fill in some of the gaps around those where the sort of the national scheme doesn't fully cover. And then finally, just to sort of put this in the full wider context of how Breckland is seeking to support businesses through the pandemic. So the role of these grants has been significant and fundamental. The core purpose, I suppose, as they're designed at a national level, is to enable businesses to sort of keep their heads above water, continue surviving and continue trading against some really difficult contexts. We have sought to supplement that, though, through a number of bits of activity. So in market towns, a lot of our efforts around making sure that a strong customer base can still continue to be there and use the high streets and keep businesses afloat by providing the key bit, which is customers. We've also sought to supplement financial schemes through individual grants. So we are at the moment supporting businesses that are looking to digitally adapt. We've helped them support if they need to increase capacity over winter. This sits in the context of a much wider package of business support, as well as support for individuals. We've identified there are gaps in the regional infrastructure, like support for startups. So we have introduced our own schemes. And this all fits in a wider context of work that we're doing, not just about sort of resilience, but also recovery and growth. So bringing in work that we're doing around Snetterton and Thetford with our things like our town delivery plans to make sure that once we get through the pandemic, there is a strong prospect for growth in Breckland. I will stop sharing my screen. So I'm conscious there's a lot of information there, and I'm sort of cantered through what's been several months of very hard work for a lot of officers. Obviously happy, I'm joined by Ali, and we're happy to take any questions from ONS.
Thank you, Andrew. Notwithstanding Fabian's comments already, and I know Fabian has held the work of officers in high regard, although Fabian can of course correct me if anything I say is wrong. Helen, I can see you. Terry, I can see you. And I've got Peter and David and Fabian. So Helen, if you could go first.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you for the presentation. I've spoken to several businesses, one in particular yesterday that I happened to go into, and were really pleased with the support that Breckland had given. And so I just wanted to pass that on. The point I would just like to ask, or the question I'd like to ask, is on 3.5, where it mentions fraudulent claims, and I appreciate that they're minimal, which is great, and they are looking to be recovered. If they are not recovered, if the money is not recovered, who takes the hit? Is it government take the hit, or do we have to pay back that money on behalf of the applicant, the grant applicant? Who takes the hit?
Thank you, Helen. Andrew?
So, did you want to come in, Ali, or I can cover it?
I can come in if you like. Yes, so the government is actually about to issue new guidance on debt collection this month, we hope. So we're not quite clear on that at the moment, but there is an expectation that for anything that we can't collect, that maybe government will provide that funding for us.
That's good to hear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. Terry?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Andrew. I think it goes without saying, but it's important that we do say things sometimes, that the COVID grants have been an absolute lifeline for thousands of businesses, certainly hundreds in Breckland, maybe even more. And without them, we'd have seen a lot more businesses not survive COVID. You know, I know from my own experience and businesses locally. So I think it's important that we recognise that, and also thank Andrew and your team for responding as well as you did, because it is unprecedented, and it is important that we recognise that sometimes. I do have a couple of observations. One is around whether the government is seeking any feedback on the grants. As good as they were, I do think it's important that we recognise that speed was preferred over proportionality. £10,000 to some business was a huge amount of money, and a drop in the ocean for others. So I appreciate there's a need for speed, but actually businesses that were allowed to continue trading and did very well. If you make PPE or signage, for example, you got £10,000, or if you've been completely closed and not able to trade whatsoever, you've also received £10,000. And personally, I didn't think that one-size-fits-all approach was necessarily the right approach, but I understand the need for the speed aspect. The other was around who was not supported. You touched upon the more sort of discretionary aspect, the discretionary grant that was available. Can I assume, therefore, that there wasn't anybody that applied looking for support and ultimately hasn't received any support? I've heard of numerous local businesses who, through whatever reason, just weren't eligible for any form of support through any of the schemes, and I wonder if there are any stats around that from a Breckland point of view about people not being supported. And then lastly, again, everything's had to be done on a mass scale. We're talking lots and lots of businesses here. There's a huge opportunity for increased dialogue between Breckland and local councils and local businesses with the council. I think it's a missed opportunity if their only interaction with Breckland is filling in those 11 questions. Actually, there's an opportunity for dialogue between the council and those organisations. Yes, it takes more resource, but actually there's an awful lot that can be gained in terms of increased communication. So I wonder if you've got the resources to adequately engage with people within the team. Thank you, Chairman.
Terry, Andrew, or Alison?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. I can come back on those. So first question, feedback. So the government has been seeking feedback throughout, and we will take all feedback from this committee as part of our efforts. That they are, I guess, understandably consolidating quite a lot of views all the time on this. And I think positively, some of the challenges you raised, they have tried to apply in subsequent schemes. And there's a sort of move to more local determination of this. But we will, and from this committee, and at any point, we're more than happy to push feedback. I think it is important to challenge and shape. In terms of those businesses not supported, so there's an open call. If people are coming across businesses who feel that they've not been supported, please let us know. We through the discretionary schemes, we believe we should have captured the vast majority of those. So we plugged gaps in terms of those who weren't in rated premises. We plugged gaps in terms of those that are self-employed. I guess the groups that I suppose are harder to support or through this and other schemes are those where it's very hard for us to demonstrate that they are a legitimate trading business or have been very recently established. That's largely just to the necessary counter-fraud checks that we're needing to apply. But our intention and aspiration is that we should be distributing this money as broadly as we can. In the current context of awards, those businesses that perhaps feel less supported are those who are still feel impacted by the economy and the pandemic, but aren't necessarily impacted by the restrictions themselves, because the latest round of funding is very targeted around the restrictions. And in terms then of your question about do we have capacity and the sort of resources to engage, I suppose the challenge we need to do, I suppose, is the challenge to us, that we have an amazing opportunity to capitalize on this, and we are committed to sort of using this to frame a new and better relationship with business. There are technical ways we can do that, maybe it's like CRM solutions and that kind of thing, but data really is the key, and we've done the hard work there, so it's just making this part of our day job.
Thank you, Andrew. Terry, you happy?
Yeah, I'm happy, Chairman.
Thank you. I've got Peter next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Councillor Crane asked my question actually, and I assume, Alison, the balance would be weighed up with the cost of trying to recover a certain amount as well, wouldn't it? Cost of going to court and everything else. I'd just like to really congratulate the team, really, because this was thrown on Breckland Council a few months ago, was thrown in at the deep end, and the logistics of getting this off the ground, it was, absolutely amazing. The logistics problems you would have come across. And I'm pleased to recognise as well the information from Councillor Eagle as well for identifying silent companies, if you like, the ones without premises, your market traders, and that's helped a lot. I've been told in my district that's helped a lot, so appreciate that input from Councillor Eagle. And the other thing I feel as well, it's going to leave a legacy. Andrew, you mentioned you're going to be looking forward to helping with startups and different things like that, so I think something that's good's going to come out of this. It's going to be a legacy for Breckland Council to be in contact and correspond with its businesses going forward, especially linking it in with the Market Towns initiative over the next few years. And just there is a bit of a question: are we have we got a time limit with this money from government, this latest round? Can we spread it out, if you like, wait till we see what's happening in the spring with possibilities of businesses getting back up again, or not getting back up? Will that funding still be available come the springtime in 2021? Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. It sounded more Alison than Andrew, those. If you have anything to add, colour-wise on that?
So the latest grant for the enhanced restrictions for businesses that were closed, that will end soon as the restrictions have ended, so that money won't be carried forward. The Tier 2 funding is an interesting one. The scheme they're calling Local Restriction Support Grant Open, that appears to be a finite pot of money. And so it's not like the other grant schemes where government was giving us all the money that we paid out. So whilst in theory that can continue for as long as we're in Tier 2, it won't go a long way. And then the other open scheme at the moment, which is the additional discretionary scheme, that money is to cover us for this financial year and next financial year. So yes, that can carry on into the spring and further.
Thank you, Alison. You happy, Peter? Good stuff. I've got David, I think, next, and then Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You will be undoubtedly, as will other councillors, be pleased to know that all of the questions I had have been answered as a result of the previous questions. But I would just like to add my congratulations to Andrew and the team. Businesses that I've spoken to in Swaffham on a regular basis, I've been very pleased with the response from Breckland, apart from the initial hiccups there were with forms and things, which is understandable, certainly. And one has always had to remind certain businesses that Breckland is only the third party here in a sense of rules and regulations that have been handed down from elsewhere, let's put it that way, and therefore not necessarily always in control of what they can and can't do, but generally very well received. And the other questions I had, particularly from Councillor Jeremy with regards to using this as a basis to form a better relationship on an ongoing basis with the businesses in the market towns and elsewhere, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And Fabian.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, the same again, the whole team. What you had to do and the turnaround was just remarkable. And we've got many village halls and local community centres to receive that money, and we forget many of those. That was an absolute lifeline to those when they lost their income, and many of them we actually had to badger to them and real push to claim. They just didn't believe they were eligible, but it has been, and it's gone to show just fantastic. I mean, my only observation, and it's really, you have picked on that, is the language that we use to communicate with businesses. Although we say a business, there are many types of businesses, and when we initially did the form for the discretionary grants, they were there, and that did feel that a lot of people felt they were excluded, although they looked at it because it asked for business number, and suddenly, oh, they're only interested in big people and not the sole traders. And once we'd actually, myself and several other councillors, we actually had to persuade those people to say, look, if this form takes you a week to complete, it's still worth at least 2,000. We feel that you are heavily eligible, but we just, going forward, we've got to get that language to appeal to others. We might have to tweak that language more down to where we're actually targeting, but you know, it was there done. I mean, and I will just say, and unfortunately mine is hindsight based, probably most of you are aware now, I think I've got the UK record for the business that's had the most national lockdowns imposed on it ever, and everyone else has just come out of COVID, or hopefully Tier 2, and many people have. I'm in a national lockdown which is open-ended due to avian influenza zone. And to go back, the last time that was a national government gave grants was back in 2001, and all we got was a rate rebate. And well, like I said, all the forms and what we've had to do now, it's just been a walk in the park compared to what we had to do for that. But it, we've just got to correct that bit, like I said, coming back to that point, to get it there, because it's left people a bitter taste. So shall we say they're treating it like the medicine in that medicine cabinet that they don't necessarily like, and it's a last resort. So some of the grants now that people have been eligible for, they've got their business back up and running, and they're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, and they just feel, is it worth the effort and the hassle? And we've just got to coax them through and touch that. But otherwise, I mean, what you had to do, it was just, you know, it is marvellous. And if I can just touch on the confidence campaign, and as what Councillor Wilkinson said, it's the legacy point. And from what like I said, my hindsight point, we need to find ways of looking forward. It's not patching what we've done, and I know we're all grateful, but that money we've used on a wider scale, we need to do it. And I think those banners, the banners that have gone up in the towns now, it's brilliant. All those towns have got them to use, and I think that's the way we've got to look. Something that's temporary doesn't help, and there's still a few things we've got to get right, because particularly in the towns, we promised everyone everything, and it caused a lot of animosity between businesses, because suddenly, oh, you promised me that, but it conflicted. And we've got to just, it's our language and going forward. But if we're building the relationships as a start, and hopefully we don't lose that dialogue, that is the important bit. But there's still things to go forward and get done. And I think we've got to keep, but not only between you, it's members and officers have got to have that dialogue and ask forward. But it is a dialogue, and we need to tweak and perhaps have 3 or 4 different types of letters depending on the towns, and even, you know, the different towns where we're arguing, that targeting, because we're going to need this help, and it's got to be pushed right to come out, and we can make, you know, Breckland a better place. But congratulations for what you did do.
Thank you very much, Fabian. I haven't got any further indications from members. So in the absence of that, it falls to us just to check exactly what the recommendation was, which was that we note the contents of the report. So thank you, Andrew and Alison, for that. That's been really helpful, and I hope you are bathing in the reflected glory of all the positive feedback that members have given. So thank you very much for all of that, and no doubt members of the public are also, where they've experienced your work, benefiting from it as well. So you guys can now go. I'm sorry it's taken till 1 o'clock to get you to escape the meeting, but know that we will be continuing doing our fine work here while you get to have lunch.
Thank you, Chair.
So thank you for that. Item 14, I think I'm on now. Sorry, I've made the mistake of flicking up to find the recommendation. Item 12, yes, outside body feedback. We normally have something from Robert, and he is indeed holding up his hand, so I presume he wishes to speak on this item. And I've got Peter as well, and I don't see anyone else at this time. So Robert, if you kick us off, and then we'll go to Peter.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The only meeting I've attended since the last scrutiny was Norfolk Health Overview Scrutiny. One of the items discussed was an update on suicide prevention in Norfolk, and Breckland did feature in that as an area where the rate has gone up slightly. However, there 7 months ago there was a suicide hotline introduced, which is a manned 24/7 by clinically qualified personnel, and in the first 7 months of operation that's dealt with 25,000 calls. I have asked for a more detailed briefing note that can be given to the comms teams of the district councils. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought I'd just make this opportunity to, as the Breckland's governor and board member at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, there is still concerns about COVID. They have at this moment in time 49 patients they are treating for COVID. None, I'm told, are in intensive care and need the oxygen. The staff now have just received the 15-minute test to carry out for the cells to obviously enhance safety for the staff and the patients. That's been rolled out this week. As I said, 49 COVID patients, 363 was discharged safely through this last year, and obviously at the start of the pandemic and up till last week, there was sadly 180 deaths recorded at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Good news, they are applying now to government funding on the second phase for a new hospital. They missed out on the first one. Breckland Council I've been in contact with the leaders and execs, and we are going to support a formal application for this new build hospital, and there will be a press release in the new year how residents and councillors can help lobbying government and officials. Breckland Youth Advisory Board, I'm the representative there. They held a successful meeting online conference. As some of you will know, we had a successful one held live in Durham last year, and they held a successful one online this year, and having eminent speakers from the University of York, and that went down very, very well. And because the last conference, if you remember the press release, they did win an award for that last year, and their mental health project is going well, and that's online for young residents affected by the COVID lockdowns to contact help through their peers. So that's it. Thank you.
Sorry, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Oh, yes, okay, that's twice today. That's embarrassing. You should always remember to unmute your mic if you're attempting to speak. I was just asking, are any other members looking to make an update to the committee under this item? And I have seen none. So thank you both, Robert and Peter, for those. We've done item 13. I don't have any call-ins that I'm aware of. Item 14 we have done, which takes us to item 15, which is the work programme. Members can see the work programme. Are there any edits or comments that anyone would like to make? I can see Mark. So we'll start off with Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. I did unmute. I see we should have been discussing the housing service review at this particular meeting on the work programme. Is that going to go forward to next month, the January meeting, or is it going to skip forward to the March meeting? Because it looks to me as though January is going to be quite full, especially if we have flagship in to do the councillor call for action.
I agree, and we also don't know what the situation will be with Banham by that point, although I expect it will probably be later in the year on that one. So I'm inclined, I will liaise with the cabinet member to check whether or not there's any urgency in us considering it, but I agree with you, in an ideal world we would put it in March. If it has to come in January, then potentially we might consider whether there is anything we could move, which there doesn't really look to be. The only one I would consider moving is the update from the commercial portfolio, if members agreed, but at the moment I'd be inclined to retain that in January because I think that's a timely item given the circumstances we find ourselves in. So in short, Mark, sorry that was a long answer. I don't know, but Ruth might be about to shed some light on something.
Sorry, I saw Councillor Webb had a hand up when you were talking about the housing. I don't know if she has a comment.
Well, not just light, but indeed answers. Alison.
No, I'm here. Okay, so housing review. The housing team have done an extremely good amount of hard work on this. However, I looked at it and I wanted to ensure that not only did we incorporate feedback from all parties to make sure that it's fit to present to yourselves as a committee, but also something that's going to make such a substantial difference to the housing team that we as Breckland members can be very proud of our housing service which we're providing to residents. So the problem is, Chairman, that I want to get this sorted as soon as possible. I am concerned about the implications that COVID at the moment, with it rolling on, the fact that we've got a lot of residents who need our will need our help in the future. So I want to be ready when we have the major rush, which I think for the housing side is yet to come. So I would really appreciate it if you could, by any means, bring it forward in the January one, because until we have the presentation to yourselves, then I'm not, obviously not content to carry on presenting it and getting it established and get it reviewed and getting it approved. It would mean another 2 months delay, which would probably be April, May by the time we actually get it up and running. The sooner we do it, the sooner the better it is for the residents and for the team as well. So I please beg you, and I'm sorry that we weren't ready to come to see you today, but I felt it was appropriate to delay until we are completely ready. Thank you.
Well, I've heard Alison's pleas, and obviously I know that committee members here are extremely empathic people. Are members happy that we put this on the January item? We just have a longer meeting? I don't see any immediate sways of dissatisfaction. So that is what we'll do. We'll just...
Can I just make a comment, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
In supporting Alison Coming on the January one, because obviously under COVID, properties have not been readied for potential customers because of COVID and working restrictions, and businesses are going to have to put these houses on back ready for the market when they come available. Because I do know of one property that came on the market 2 weeks, well, on the bidding 2 weeks ago, one property in Swaffham, and 60 families, potential families, had to bid on that house. So obviously that's a very important issue at the moment.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, so I think committee are agreed. I have Ian and Mark to make comments. Ian, then Mark.
Just quickly, Joan, looking at the yeah, and by the way, apologies for my earlier email. I missed the corporate plan refresh for January. The one item on there, which whilst it's important, isn't time limited, is the planning enforcement one for January. So
yes, I'm very
close to my heart.
I'm unkeen to move that because
Okay.
I know that we have already moved that once, and David, I know, is particularly keen to hear that item, and I don't want to upset him again. So I think we may just have a longer meeting. Mark, do you have a comment to make?
Yes, Chairman. I think I'd make a proposal that to your discretion on the size of the meeting, but we have two imponderables, don't we? We have one councillor call for action and Ban Poultry and the Environment Agency. And if those two raise their ugly heads, then the meeting will go on, past lunchtime and into tea time. Which I think is probably too much for people to look at a screen for that length of time.
I agree with you. So what I will undertake is that Ban Poultry will not be brought to that meeting, come what may. It's in the middle of an investigation. I don't expect it would finish anyway in advance of that meeting. So we will say Ban Poultry will come no earlier than March. If Flagship are able to come, I do think we will accept them at that January meeting, and we will just need to make sure that our questioning is even more focused and succinct than normal when dealing with the various agenda items. So yes, but no, I am determined that we don't end up being here until tea, if at all possible. Are there any other final points on the work programme? Seeing none, David? Go ahead.
Only a quick comment, Mr. Chairman, which I'm sure everybody will be pleased to hear. Because of the delay from the previous planning enforcement issue, I have been doing a lot of work with Simon on that particular subject in the interim. So I do not anticipate that would be a lengthy debate, if that's the right word to use.
That is extremely heartening news, and I know Mark will be particularly happy to hear that he might have some of his day given back to him by the end of that meeting in January. Excellent, in which case I see no other comments, so we will amend the work programme as discussed, and it falls to me to suggest the date of the next meeting, which you have on your agendas, and then if everyone's happy, I will close the meeting. Alison, are you waving? Are you waving goodbye? Oh, good. Okay, she's waving goodbye. No further comments. In which case, thank you. Thank you very much for attending, and have a